The story kicks off with Chamber, and two girls snap him a harsh truth. He's starting to weigh them down. They'd been sitting there waiting on him for ages, convinced he'd finally show up and learn something that could actually help them. But that wasn't the case, so he ripped them down and hauled them with him. They plastered a fake smile on their faces and told him, like it was destiny, that they'd stand with him at dawn. Two girls practically latched onto Jane, tugging close and blurting that Chamber was about to bolt from the party, so Jane just stared, completely thrown off, and demanded why he'd do something like that. And that's when Martha fired off the excuse she cooked up. For adventurers, its simple skills are everything. On your 15th birthday, you get one, and that one power basically writes your entire fate. Turns out his Chamber skill leveled up, and it was the most useless upgrade imaginable. She bragged that her fire magic was way ahead of his, while Naru was the one rocking holy magic, and as for Jane, yeah, he was the hero. And that's why Chamber probably felt completely out of place in this party, so Jane shot her a worried look and asked where she was headed. But the two girls didn't give him a second thought. They even told Jane to stop sulking over that boy and just erase everything that had happened. But the hero couldn't shake the worry for his comrade, and he kept asking himself how they were holding up. Meanwhile, over on the other side, that Chamber was locked in a brutal fight, barely holding its ground against a relentless. A couple of monsters stalked the wild, and when he couldn't even scratch them yet, it was clear he didn't stand a chance, at least not until he found a way to hit back. Then it hit him, this wasn't as easy as it looked. Usually when he stepped into the party, he wasn't there to steal the spotlight. He tore into the front line, soaked up every hit, and yanked the enemy's attention while the others tore them apart. Then he snapped his head side to side, fighting to kick that thought out, because the morning was gone and he wasn't in the dawn anymore. He was gone, there was no spot left for him in that party, so with everything falling on his shoulders, he exploded into a sprint straight at the monsters. The monster swung its club at him, and he slammed his sword up to block the hit. He kept telling himself to stay calm, like he could hold his nerves in check no matter what. He stayed calm for a heartbeat, then snap, he cut the enemy down in an instant. But nope, that wasn't the finish. Another attacker came flying in from behind, and he slammed the block down again, just like that. Then he swung with lightning speed and hacked the monster's head clean off. After wiping out his opponents, he sucked in deep breaths, convinced, right in that moment, that he could truly handle this all alone. Right out of nowhere, another monster lunged in and smashed him straight in the face. He finally clocked it. This was the first one he'd actually failed to wipe out completely. He clawed his way to his feet, but the monster wouldn't let him breathe. No mercy, no pause. And snatched his face in her grip. The monster lined in, ready to end him for good. And in that instant, those two girls slammed back into his mind like a punch, always looking him up and down, spitting out that he was nothing but a useless burden. He gripped his sword tight, but those voices kept screaming in his head, and he couldn't silence them even for a second, and kept barking at them to shut up, using that fury like fuel as he dug deep, grabbed the last of his strength, and drove his sword into the monster with everything he had. With it all finally over, pure frustration crushed him. He'd been moments from dying just because he picked a fight with a weak monster. He dropped to the ground and grabbed at air, because his body refused to move another inch. And when he snapped his gaze up to the sky, the thought hit him, he was really about to die right here. His vision started to fade, like the world was slipping out of focus. Then bam, a notification flashed in front of him. He leveled up, and with it, his health and mana were fully restored. He had zero clue what was happening, then suddenly it hit him. He could move his body again. And the scars on his face had finally faded, like the pain was erased. Dozens of burning questions were sprinting through his mind, like, what the heck was that level-up voice he just heard? Why was a glowing plate hovering in front of him, and what on earth did HP and MP even mean? He had zero clue what was happening. But he couldn't shake the feeling that every one of those values was meant to match what he could truly do, like his power was being measured right there in numbers. And right then it hit him, this had to be his skill, and the level up just unlocked. Staring at the window hovering in front of him, he watched his stats jump, and then his mind raced. Did that mean his physical power had leveled up too? He finally connected the dots. Every time he leveled up, his HP and MP shot back to full, and that's why his wounds sealed up like nothing happened. And his attack, defense, and speed skyrocketed too, so basically with this skill. The idea that he could keep getting stronger lit a fire in his chest, and he practically jumped with excitement, because it turned out his skill wasn't some useless dud, it actually hit hard. Ever since that day, he's been tearing through monster after monster, left and right. and you could practically feel the level-up power hitting him, like it was coursing straight through his veins. He felt lighter than ever, and when he swung his sword now, it practically moved for him. And now that his MP finally jumped, he unlocked magic he used to be totally blocked from using, and with all that power stacking up, things were about to explode. He finally crushed the orc that had been giving him hell, and it was shockingly easy this time. He leveled up again, snapping to level 4, and that pretty much proved his theory. Smash enough monsters and your level keeps climbing. At least, that's what it looked like. But later, when he finally crashed into his brand new base, Rumble, he couldn't figure out why his levels just stopped climbing. He'd been battling monsters nonstop for ages, but his level just wouldn't budge. He was stuck and he kept clawing for a reason it wasn't rising anymore, but no real answers ever showed up. With strength burning in his chest, he clenched that goal like a vow, and with that thought hammering in his mind, he hit the bed and shut his eyes for the night. The next day, he stormed into the Adventure Guild to hunt down a fresh quest that would light a fire in his heart. But somehow, every single one of them felt mediocre. So he sidled up to Nyako at the front desk, asked for a killer quest, and tried to charm her by gushing that her cat ears were totally adorable. But the moment she made it clear she wasn't just any tiger, she was a noble one, it only struck her pride even harder, like a fresh insult. She snapped at him, reminding him their quests were first come, first served, and he really should have known that by now, considering he's been in the rumble for months. But right then, a loud commotion erupted inside the guild. And this woman was getting thrown out, straight up exiled from her own party. Her comrade was screaming that her skill was trash, like they didn't need her at all anymore. Seeing that chamber, he couldn't stop himself from thinking, this is the same hell I faced from my own party, when they called me a burden and threw me out. Her comrades couldn't wait to see what would happen to someone as useless as her, and then they just ditched her there. The girl lunged to stop them, but nothing she did could change what was coming. And there she stood, totally alone, emotions crashing down, wondering, were they really right about her? Chambers strode up to her and poured out empathy, like he finally understood exactly how heavy her heart must be. Then he leaned in and told her, I know a spot that'll be way better for you, and wow, it was. He stepped in and told her, come stay with me. Every member in the guild froze in shock the moment they heard it. And even the girl was crumpling with embarrassment, while he looked totally lost, because in his mind, he'd never meant it like that. The girl's comrades burst into laughter, like she'd somehow recruited someone to look after her in the blink of an eye. And she warned Chamber that he'd soon realize her skill was total trash, right as the divine message hit. He couldn't stop wondering what that skill actually does. Before they even left, the women laughed in their faces, saying the two of them were somehow the perfect match, like their dull vibes were made for each other. Later, the two of them slid into a tavern and sank into their seats. And he ordered a round of ale for them, but she looked uneasy the whole time. Then he told her straight up that he'd just been exiled too, and ever since then, every time disaster struck, he clung to ale like she was the only good thing left. He didn't pressure her at all, he just told her, if you don't want to drink, I'll take both, and made sure she felt safe. When he heard her chuckle and say yes, she sat right down to drink with him. Then he leaned in, introduced himself, and told her he was out adventuring alone too, right this moment. She copied the move and stepped in, introducing herself as Ale, the deranked venture with a past that still hit like thunder. Then Chamber admitted he was technically C-rank, but going solo made him feel basically G-rank, so when she heard it, panic hit hard and she blurted out that she was even below E-rank, while he tried to steady her and get her to breathe. She confessed that even as a priestess, the only healing spell she was allowed to cast was the pathetic Lesser Heal, and when it sank in, tears burst out of her as she swore she was nothing but useless. Even Chamber got what she meant, because deep down, he knew he was just as useless as she was. All of a sudden, Ale started acting super strange, and blurted that Chamber was only 30 points away from leveling up next. Hold up, once that message lands, we're stopping right there. She snapped back into reality, and panic hit her like a truck. She kept blurting out apologies, even admitting she sometimes talks before thinking, because her skill makes it slip out before she can stop it. She blushed so hard she could barely breathe, ranting that her skill was totally useless, while he stood there completely clueless about what was happening to her. Then it clicked, he started putting everything together, because when she said, level up, he realized she was talking about experience points. He finally cracked the truth about her power. This was what she could really do. Then he yanked her toward him in a rush, blurting out that he desperately needed her right now. At the dawn, Martha kicked out yet another member of their party because he was still way too weak, even with that handy skill, yet the man refused to back down, Just as he reached for his sword, she lunged first and detonated an explosion right behind him. She warned him, "Next time, don't mess with me," and the man bolted for his life. Naru was soaking up every second in the back, but Jane wasn't in the same happy mood at all. And he basically said the two of them were going way too far. The girls kept bickering, swearing they needed the perfect new people for Dawn, someone who fit, not just anyone. While Jane wrestled with the shock of how 3 members of their party had already been thrown out. He could tell that Martha and Nauru had real fire in their skills. They acted like they were untouchable, and it made him wonder if talent could genuinely flip someone's whole world that fast. Don's party rank kept climbing, but a cold dread wouldn't let go, because when he thought back to the days he used to enjoy Chambers' company, something felt terribly off. He couldn't shake the thought, if this was the reason, then everything felt different for a reason. He couldn't even wrap his head around it. Don was telling him there was no spot for him. And he just had to know what the heck he was doing right now. Later on, Chamber and Ale smashed forward with their adventure, chasing whatever came next. While he battled the monster with everything he had, she stayed close behind him and shielded his back. He rained blows on the monsters and wiped them out. And he thanked her for the help. Turns out those 2 exiles had decided to team up and run a trial together. It felt like forever since he last tackled a quest with someone, because for a while now, he'd been stuck fighting alone. Now he kept pressing forward, ripping the monster apart stroke by stroke as it fought back. He could feel it, his power surged higher and higher, and it was all because of his level-up skill. Once he handled every last one of them, Ale just stared in disbelief at how insanely strong he was, and she praised him like he was unstoppable. He was over the moon, finally getting to shine in a real fight, and getting praise from a girl while it all happened. That level-up skill saved his life. Every time he crushed monsters and racked up experience points, it supercharged his power like nothing else. Ale's skill was Divine Revelation, powerful as hell, but not exactly simple to use. Divine Revelations lit up the air with secret truths, right for everyone nearby to hear. And earlier in the tavern, she filled him in on exactly how far he'd come toward the next level, straight up super useful. And right there he cracked the code. Every goblin he wipes out hands him a juicy 3 experience points. And every time he levels up, the XP he needs for the next level jumps higher and higher. So yeah, back in the present, he was sure, those goblins he just wiped out were exactly what he needed. He's finally got the chance to level up right now. Then Ale snapped, called him out, and seized his hand like she was forcing the truth to move. He got hit with pure shock and blurted, "What are you doing?" She shot a finger his way and snapped, "Hold up, your arm's hurt." And she stepped in, promising to mend him with her healing magic. Just as she was about to make her move, he suddenly got a message. He'd leveled up. It basically proved his math was right. And yeah, he felt a little proud of himself, but Ale suddenly erupted into screaming, totally stunned as he saw that his arms. Her arm healed all on its own, like nothing happened, without her lifting a finger. He shrugged it off like, it's just leveling up, but then it hit him, first time he'd ever leveled in front of someone else, and suddenly he knew he had a lot to explain. Later that night, as they built a campfire, he leaned in and poured out every detail of his skill for her. After he wipes out monsters, he scoops up those experience points, and that power surge rockets him up a level, boosting his stats like crazy. She couldn't believe a skill like that even existed, and he straight up agreed with her. So hey, jokes aside, she admitted she was crazy jealous, because her own skill was totally useless for adventuring. While they were still talking, he leaned in and asked her why she chose to become an adventurer. And she fired back that revenge was the only thing she wanted. He nearly jumped when she said it. And she told him it all began back when she was just a kid. She was the second daughter in a family of 4. While her parents, both merchants, were always away, she got stuck with the acquaintances, and her older sister, 7 years older, shouldered the work that should have been hers. One ordinary day rolled in, so she packed up her family, watched them leave, and then waited, heart pounding, for them to come back. They never came back because on the road, thieves ambushed them and wiped them out. After her family was gone, they tossed her into an orphanage, and she shut herself away like the world didn't deserve her. All day and night, her mind gnawed at one brutal question. Why would her gentle, good-hearted family have to suffer like that? Over time, hatred seeped into her heart and left it stained. And that's why she craved the life of an adventurer, so one day she could strike back and avenge her family. Chambers' mouth went dry, and she knew he'd be stunned too after everything she just spilled. With a smile lighting up her face, she leaned in and told him, "It's all behind us now." She finally understood. Since she was the lone survivor of her loving family, they wouldn't want her to waste her whole life chasing revenge. And And she was certain those villains had already been marked as fugitives, because at this point, they'd be getting hammered by fate like they deserved. So right now, she just wanted to become an amazing adventurer, until, once again, she triggered something that would change everything. And then he straight up told her that it was an impossible dream because she was too weak to even chase it. Chambers snapped back immediately, shutting that idea down. No way, not happening. With a radiant grin, he declared that the two of them would become legendary adventurers side by side. She staggered back, stunned, speechless. After they wrapped up dinner, Ale just stared at him like he was suddenly impossible to ignore. Then she leaned in and demanded to hear his story, why he ever chose to become an adventurer. He started to panic and asked, "Do we really have to talk about this?" But she just smiled and said it was only logical that he share too, since she'd already brought it up. He admitted she was right, then spilled the real reason he became an adventurer in the first place. Cut to a flashback, back when he was a kid. One day, he watched Jane slice through an opponent in a fierce sword fight. Everyone stared in stunned silence when a 10-year-old steamrolled an adult adventurer, even if the adult was low rank, and they all instantly started calling him a genius. So Chamber barreled after him and hauled him into a sword duel, daring him to fight. Even after 33 brutal fights, he still couldn't land a single hit on him. Jane snapped at him to quit already, saying he didn't have the talent and some things can't be forced no matter how hard you try. Chamber even admitted she might be right, but he still refused to surrender, and yet he couldn't stop. And screamed that he couldn't stop now, he had to keep pushing forward. His one rule was simple: never give up, no matter what anyone else tries to tell him. Seeing how blazing his passion burned, Jane couldn't help but be impressed, and she straight up said, "And honestly, not quitting might be its own special kind of talent." Ever since that day, the two locked in as friends, and Chamber swore he'd become the world's greatest adventurer, so big he'd even outshine the talented Jane too. When he snapped back to the present, he finally admitted it wasn't some grand plan, just a risky, impulsive move. Ale was seriously into his story, and he couldn't help wondering if this is what rivalry is supposed to feel like. Once she said it out loud, he started praying their connection would turn into the same kind of rivalry too. Meanwhile, at Jane's party, another guest got thrown out, and he stormed out of the room, fuming with pure frustration. Those two girls didn't care at all. They flat out called him useless to his face. Right then, Jane burst through the door and he leaned in and demanded how many exiles there, deep in, and you could tell that guy was really trying, but the girls just burst into laughter, saying he didn't even come close to their standards. She insisted that no matter how hard you grind, you can't outrun the absence of raw talent. Jane then said with full confidence that not a single person could ever touch him in a sword fight. He was sure it wasn't just raw talent. He'd learned that effort is what makes the difference, and even in a chamber, he realized talent alone doesn't always win. And no matter how hard he tried, him and the other two just couldn't get on the same page about this. He announced right then and there that Akatsuki had just fallen apart. The moment it hit, both of them froze in shock and started grilling each other with questions. Why would he do all this when Akatsuki was seconds away from A rank, and S rank was basically within their claws? They even bragged they were the best party ever. Jane shot back that maybe it sounded right in terms of skills, but for him, that wasn't nearly enough, so they pressed him, "Did you even choose a new partner?" And he just said, "I can team up with Chamber," leaving them both utterly stunned. But first, he had to hit the reset button, alone, no one else. And just like that, he stormed off, leaving them with one blazing goal: to become the best adventurers from scratch in Scratch 2. We cut back to the Chamber inside a tavern, where he was just sitting there like he didn't know danger was creeping in. Ale crept up behind him and sent a full-blown shock straight through his soul. She started pounding drinks again, begging him to take just one more, and then bam, her skill kicked on without warning. And she told him he needed 60 more experience points before he could level up. She snapped back to her senses, and he just sat there thinking, wow, her skill had been saving him this whole time. He dove into the math to figure out how much work would earn him 60 more EXP, but right when he got going, he knew, once again, he'd call them out. And pushed him to drink with her. He nodded, agreed fast, and then he was actually. I couldn't believe it. She clearly loved to drink, and right as he said it, her smile vanished and she went dead silent. She went silent, then the tears burst out, right on the spot. Panic hit him and he started worrying he'd said something wrong, so he rushed to tell her he didn't mean it badly, and right after that, she apologized for tearing up like that. She basically said, honestly, kicking back with him is just so much fun. She'd been dragging her party down for ages, but after the quest, the moment she started drinking with him, she finally felt like a true adventurer. Chamber just let out a chuckle and told her, straight up, that it was really her who pulled him out of rock bottom after he got cast out, so now he had to thank her. But she had already curled up and fallen asleep, and he just grinned at her like he'd already won. Soon after, the two of them clenched their fists, looked at each other, and decided to keep the adventure rolling. And he couldn't believe how fired up she was, because after all that she drank the other day, nobody expected her to still have that much energy. Right then, he spotted a nasty pack of goblins lurking in the woods, and with lightning speed, he yanked out his sword and stood ready to hack into those monsters. Right as he started cutting them down, more kept pouring in from behind. But that barely even mattered to him. He just kept swinging his sword, smashing into the fight while Ale didn't just keep up, she could handle everything on her own. So the two of them locked eyes, then pushed onward, no stopping now. After wiping out those monsters, they finally slowed down for a breath, just for a second. And Ale still looked rattled, because they'd just battered through a mountain of monsters, while Chamber was practically glowing that they'd finally made it out alive. They locked arms like the whole world was against them, just the two of them together. Then right in the middle of everything, his phone buzzed with a message. He'd leveled up, and the shock hit him hard as he finally realized they'd wiped out that many. But then boom, he spotted a strange icon hovering above the veil, and his brain instantly went, wait, what is happening here? He got a message that finally taught him the party formation he'd been missing. And he just froze there, completely lost, like his brain couldn't catch up. He'd never seen or heard anything like it. Then he tapped the description, and it showed him the exact crew he could team up with for his party. And on top of all that, Ale was sitting at the very top of the list. An arrow was sitting by her name, and the second he clicked it, a confirmation pop-up sprang open. He leaned in and asked, "Want me to add her to your party?" He still didn't fully get it, because yeah, technically, the two of them were already in the same party. So he went for it and smashed confirm without looking back. Then he stopped cold and realized, no, he can't be the only one deciding this. He called her over, and with nerves clawing at his chest, he asked if she'd team up with him. Then he just stopped staring. Nerves hit him so hard, he couldn't even hold someone's gaze. But the second he met her eyes, she just stood there, totally baffled. She told her that they'd already teamed up, and he straight up admitted she was 100% right. So what he really meant was this: he was officially teaming up and fully committing to it. Before he could even finish, she blurted out yes in the blink of an eye, and he froze in shock. She reminded him that he'd promised them they'd become amazing adventurers together. So with that settled, she finally made it official. She was ready to team up with him. He lit up hearing that, and right then, they decided, no hesitation, just to press forward. With a click on that confirmation button, he snapped her into his party. He stared at the silence, baffled. Nothing was changing at all, and then it hit him. If they built an entire feature around it, there had to be something big behind it. Then Ale snapped into the conversation, calling them out and pushing, "All right, now that we're officially a party, we keep moving forward." He nodded along with her, and with sunset still hanging a bit off, he decided to bolt straight for the new forest. Step into the forest, and the monsters swarm from every shadow. Chamber lunges in and battles them head-on, while Ale keeps him alive with rapid healing magic. Now that they were a duo at this party, he could feel their moves locking in and syncing up perfectly. After wiping out a swarm of monsters, he charged straight to the fallen magic stones, scooping them up one by one. They could snag some real cash if they hauled it back to the guild. Then boom, the level-up voice rang out, and this time. In that same moment, Ale heard it too, and it threw both of them into total confusion. Turns out it wasn't him at all. She was the one who'd leveled up, and her HP and MP came roaring back to full. She had no clue why her body was going through all this, or why a voice was suddenly screaming inside her head. Then Chamber stared in stunned disbelief, because she just leveled up too, like it happened to him. He finally clocked it. When he throws a party with someone, their levels surge too, and that made him wonder, was this the real secret behind the party formation feature all along? He tried to rush over and check her stats, but she stared back like, "Wait, what are you even talking about?" Right then, her stat window burst open in front of her eyes, shocking her all over again, while he started ripping through her stats. He leaned in and told her, straight up, that she'd actually leveled up. She couldn't even process it, so she blurted out, "Is this really because of your skills?" He figured that was the answer, nodded, and broke down what stats actually are, then showed her how they keep climbing every time the levels go up. Bursting with excitement, she asked if this meant she'd really gotten stronger, and he nodded, "Yep, that's exactly how it works." She burst with joy and started celebrating. Then her smile froze, because she realized something even bigger was coming. More, she just got a message, and it said she could finally use the light arrow now. And she practically burst with excitement, because before she could only heal, but now she could finally unleash attack magic too, and Chamber was cheering right along with her. Now that she finally got her hands on attack magic, they wasted zero time and immediately pushed it to the test. So she aimed straight at the tree in front of her. She raised her wand and blasted a delight arrow straight at it, landing the perfect hit on that tree. The arrow punched a hole straight through the tree, and Chamber was absolutely blown away. Ale couldn't even catch her breath. She was jumping from pure excitement, still stunned that she'd actually pulled off attack magic. But right then, he spotted a squad of enemies hiding in the grass, and he blurted out a warning to her without a second to lose. Turns out, right behind that tree, a whole pack of goblins had been lurking, straight up a horde. He could feel things spiraling out of control, and he shouted at everyone to scatter and get out of there, fast. Just as she ran, the goblins slammed in right behind her heels. But with so many of them showing up, he couldn't shake the question, did the noise summon them, or were they all claiming this place as their turf? The two of them bolted for their lives, while the goblins kept snapping at their heels, closing in fast. They were flooding in from every side, one direction after another, closing in fast. And somehow, the two of them tore through every monster that dared cross their path. But the horde kept surging forward, charging straight at them again and again. A goblin lunged forward, snatched onto Vale's bag, and yanked it tight in its grip. Chambers snapped at her to dump her stuff, right now. Stuff, and she hurled the bag over her shoulder behind her. The goblins all snapped their focus right onto that bag. And when he saw every last one of them staring at the loot, he tossed his own bag too. Then the two of them seized that exact moment to move. Bolting straight out of the forest. They finally burst out of the forest, and when they stumbled to a stop to gulp down air, they spun around and realized the goblins had stopped chasing them the moment they vanished into the woods. So they turned around and sprinted back to the rumbling to spill the whole story to the Adventurers Guild. Later, they burst into the guild, laid out every detail for the receptionist, and her eyes widened even more when she heard that something like this had happened in the Noi Forest. Then she spotted another woman hanging out by the stairs, and she ordered the chambermaid to tail that woman and hurry up the stairs. She marched him upstairs and guided him straight into the room. And when he stepped inside, everything changed. A mysterious stranger didn't waste a second. He apologized to him right out of the gate for showing up so suddenly like that. But there was one thing burning in his chest, something he had to talk about right then. Chamber blinked in confusion and asked if he was really just standing there waiting for him, and he shot back that he had a request he just couldn't wait to make. But before anything else, he stepped up and introduced himself as the guild manager. Chambers' Suranui and everything they heard still left him totally baffled. He couldn't figure out how a guy like him would ever have the nerve to ask for something like that. The manager leaned in and told him the hero party, Dawn, was just about to level up, and since Chamber was part of that crew too, he had one burning question to ask about them. Clenched his fist with pure frustration, Chamber snapped that he wasn't part of that crew anymore, then added that back when he was there, it was only because of his rank. The bank manager abruptly changed the subject and told him he'd heard his latest performances were seriously impressive. He told him, relax, there's no need to get drenched in nerves, saying he only needed his help for an investigation request. Then he leaned in and told him exactly where to dig into the new forest, where the mystery waited. Just minutes ago, he told us the force was swarming with goblins, and the manager demanded he dig into what was really fueling that madness. He also told him to run the investigation in daylight, because goblins hit their peak at night, so by day, they'd be fewer and far easier to deal with. The guild couldn't shake the feeling. Something bigger was lurking out there, and they feared a king goblin was hiding in that forest. So the manager snapped at him. If he ever crossed paths with the Goblin King, he better bolt right then, because everyone knew that monster was terrifyingly strong. Chamber quickly understood that this easy request was actually a trap, but the manager brushed it off again, swearing it was nothing to fear, and that it was just a harmless survey he had to complete. So later, he and Ale slipped back into the forest, and she could tell worry was already eating him alive. So she demanded to know what was going through his head, and he admitted this mission was deadly. He was even scared for her, because they'd already faced a power like that before, and it wasn't normal at all. Then she snapped and fired back. Did he really think she was unreliable? She reminded him, we're at a party now, so whatever chaos hits, I'm sticking with you. He dropped the argument for good, and Ale practically vibrated with excitement to dive back into their investigation. Right then, he spotted a hulking goblin blocking his path. And the real gut punch, what blew his mind even harder, was that the fighter was a goblin swordsman. It was huge and brutally stronger than any regular goblin, and people said it worked alongside the smaller ones like a tiny mini-boss inside the pack. The two of them ducked behind a bush in a flash, and as he spilled every detail to her, she stayed right there, listening, breath held. She stared at him, genuinely impressed by how much he knew about every monster around, then blurted out, "So, have you ever fought one yourself?" He snapped back that no, he hadn't, but deep down, he swore they could still do it with their current strength. They saw their chance, and the two of them burst out of hiding, ready to square up against the goblins. Hale struck first, loosing a blazing light arrow straight at her opponent. She swung hard, and the blade slammed straight into the goblin swordsman's eye. But that still wasn't gonna cut it. Before it could finish him off, the Chambers already clocked what was coming, darted in, and slammed straight toward the monster with his sword. With one brutal swing, he hacked the goblin swordsman's head clean off. With their leader knocked out, the regular goblins freaked out and started panicking. Chamber and Ale didn't waste a second. When the confusion hit, they slammed the attack and kept pushing forward. And somehow they mowed down every last one of them. And Ale bandaged him up, begged him to slow down. This was just an investigation, not some reckless race to the finish. Chamber got her point, but he still pushed for extra experience points, just in case they ever collide with the Dalton King, so leveling up could boost their odds of surviving. Yeah, sure, by day there wouldn't be some massive swarm, but if they got spotted, getting backup would turn into a total headache, so he wanted to be ready for anything. Ale nodded, leveled up, and set out to take down the Goblin King. They pushed deeper into the forest, mowing down every normal goblin that tried to block their path. And then finally, they stumbled onto a campsite. Goblin tracks crisscrossed the whole place. It looked totally ransacked, and they couldn't shake the question, did some adventurers get ambushed right here? Right then, Chamber snapped, remembering one last thing the guild manager had told him. The AC rank party vanished somewhere in the New Forest, and he begged him to investigate it too, if he ever got the chance. When he realized people tied to this case had vanished, he couldn't shake the thought that the other adventurers just tossed this nightmare onto him. Right then, he'll spot something lying on the ground. And the moment she snatched it up, she clocked Adelina's, earring the moment she laid eyes on it. She de-led her old party, then that same guild turned on her and exiled her that very day. While her crew was pitching their camp, the two of them finally caught on. They were probably getting clobbered by a whole horde of goblins. Ale pushed to hunt for them even deeper in the forest, then told him she was sorry for pulling him into this, because she knew how dangerous it was, but she couldn't stop herself from doing it. Chambers just smirked and told her, "I already knew you'd say that." He nodded and jumped in to help her track down Adeline, then followed the goblins, trail step by step, chasing every clue to see where it would lead. On their way, he spotted a hand jutting from the bushes, and when they got close enough to check, the horror hit hard. They stared in disbelief at the heap of goblin corpses piled in that spot, mouths hanging open, because what on earth happened here? Then they spotted a streak of blue cutting deeper into the forest, and it guided them straight to a cave. The cave walls were smeared with blood, and total darkness swallowed the inside, so both of them got that uneasy, sinking feeling right away. Still, Chamber snatched the lead and surged ahead. He flicked out light magic and blasted a glowing ball into the air, flooding everything around him with bright, blinding light. Ale stared in shock again, completely blown away by his own spells. He added that if goblins were lurking in that cave, they still shouldn't come bursting out, because everyone knew they crumpled at the first flash of light. Then he shouted inside, checking if anyone was in there. Then a voice cut in, firing questions at him like a spotlight. "Who are you?" And it turns out, Adelina and her entire crew were crammed inside that cave, hiding from what was coming. They looked absolutely wrecked, and Adele sprinted right up to her, demanding to know if she was okay. Then she swore she could heal her, while Adelina stood there like, still totally clueless about what the heck the two of them were even doing here. But Ale just told her to drop it for now, and then hit her with her healing magic. After she stitched all three back to health, Adelina pressed her with one fierce question. Why was she saving the very people who had kicked her out like she didn't matter? And with a calm, knowing grin, she shrugged it off and said it didn't matter to her at all. She'd become an adventurer to help people, and she was just doing what felt perfectly natural to her, leaving all three of them totally stunned and speechless. Adelina burst into a little chuckle, then told him with all her heart that she'd never forget his kindness. Ale didn't want to come off like she was standing on a throne, so she blurted out a quick apology to her right away. Adelina swore she'd buy them all a drink the moment they were out, and that promise lit a fire under everyone as they bolted straight out of the forest. But then, boom, one of her men suddenly spotted something. Right outside the cave, a goblin mage stood there with a couple of regular goblins, waiting like trouble was about to break loose. Cave monsters might be low level, but this one was a menace, able to sling attack magic, and Adelina pointed out the brutal problem. None of us had any ranged attacks. They had to sneak in quietly, staying unseen, but right as she was barely getting the words out, Ale ripped a light arrow through the air and crushed the goblin mage with a single, brutal strike, leaving all three of them totally frozen, because it was the first time they'd ever seen her unleash attack magic. Chamber swept up the weaker ones, while Ale blasted cover from the side, Adelina and her crew just couldn't wrap their heads around what they were witnessing. The two of them mowed through every last goblin like it was nothing, not even a sweat drop. Right then, both of them shot up a level. Chamber hit level 7, and Ale landed at level 6. Both of them erupted with joy and burst into dancing, and the others just stared, totally stunned. Their eyes widened because they'd never seen Ale smile that bright. Right then, Adelina finally understood. The chamber had changed him. And yeah, she couldn't help but feel genuinely relieved to see it. Chamber then spun around and demanded they all follow him, because he alone knew the way out of that cursed forest. One of the men spotted more goblins nearby, and with every second, his patience hit the breaking point. He was done with them, so he yanked out his axe and swore this was his final shot at revenge, until the moment he was about to swing. A mysterious stranger slipped in out of nowhere. He cut through the goblins, and then the adventurer, so fast it was over in an instant, leaving everyone staring in total disbelief. A hooded stranger swept in and wiped out the goblins, fast. And those bolts were scattered on the ground too. He died right there, bleeding out from that brutal wound, and not a single one of them had a clue who he even was or what was happening. Adeline's comrades urged a full escape, because staying put didn't look safe for even a second, while Adeline cut them off with a sharp, "Quit whining like a baby," right to his face. She didn't want a full-on brawl, but when she saw that hooded man gripping his sword, it was clear he wasn't about to let any of them walk away. They had no choice now: team up, lock eyes, and rip through the problem until they found a way out of that place. She ordered Ale to brace the rear guard, while Chamber threw himself into the front lines like a cannon charging in. At the last second, she and her partner Ricardo picked the perfect opening to strike, while Chamber forced himself to breathe, because he was locked in, telling himself he'd leveled up and was stronger than ever. And with that, the four of them locked in, squared up, and took their spots for the fight. Hale kicked things off by firing a glowing light arrow, but the enemy slipped out of the way with effortless grace. Then Chamber seized the opening and lunged in, driving forward with his sword. And once again, he snapped out of the strike with crazy agility. The hooded figure snapped back and swung his sword hard. And somehow Chamber managed to stop it, but the barrage came at lightning speed, and Chamber knew he couldn't keep the wall up for much longer. While Ricardo distracted him, he seized the opening, snapped on his quick dash, and surged in from behind to smash the opponent. He managed to land the strike, but it never pierced through him. And then it hit him under that hood. He was actually strapped in with full-on armor. But it was already too late. Ricardo got steadied by a desperate swordsman's final, clutch move. Ricardo yanked his hood back, desperate to finally see who this mystery person really was. And then, boom, it turns out this thing was a black goblin. Watching the darkness swallow everything whole, Chamber started to doubt it was even a goblin at all, until the creature lunged. He barely dodged in time, and a slash tore open his face. Bloob flooded his eyes, blinding him mid-breath, while that goblin crouched, ready to crash in with the final strike and finish him for good. Then, right out of nowhere, a bright arrow slammed into the goblin's face. Hale slammed in at the very last second and yanked him out of death's grip. Even though the arrow slammed into its face, the goblin didn't even flinch, and just like that, every bit of its focus snapped onto her. The goblin lunged straight at her, and the Chamber blasted a warning for her to run now. Before she could even wrap her mind around it, the goblin slammed right into her face. Right then, Adelina snapped into action, throwing herself in front of her like a wall and blocking the strike dead-on with her sword. But it still wasn't over. She took more hits, and before she knew it, bleeding from head to toe. And just like that, she declared, "Debt paid, I'm finally square with you." Then Ale immediately stepped in, ready to heal her wounds on the spot. But she cut her off, no time for that, because the black goblin was still charging straight at them, and she snapped that she needed to look out for herself first, not everyone else. But before she could even blink, the goblin was already on her, right there, ready to end her. Chamber burst in from behind and slammed into him with his sword. He couldn't slice him at all. His attack only scratched him a bit, like he'd been punching a rock. The goblin snapped back to its feet and smashed its kicks into the chambers with bone-jarring force. It blasted him backward, slamming him into a tree like a wrecking ball. Hale's stomach dropped with worry, and when Adelina climbed back to her feet, she sprinted straight for that goblin. She lunged at him with her sword, aiming to end him in one strike. And the goblin snapped his block up with effortless ease, but still she didn't stop. She lunged forward and drove a step into his eye, and the goblins erupted into scream-filled agony. She burst out laughing at the goblin, because after all this time, she'd finally uncovered the softer part of him, but before she could even react, the goblin swung his sword and closed the distance in a blink. She was frozen, stunned. Ale demanded why she was moving so recklessly, and she snapped back that this was her pride-fueled way of leading, the kind that wouldn't let her flee while her comrades were getting cut down right in front of her. Ale was nothing like her. She even tossed her out of the party, yet she kept using her healing magic to help them anyway. Even though they weren't on the same team anymore, she still found strength with her final breath to shout at her, "Hurry, run." Every black goblin rushed in and sliced her clean in half right in front of Ale. She was so shocked she couldn't even get words out, then her knees buckled and she dropped to the ground. Chamber struggled back to his feet and realized this was Madonna's last, life-or-death opening. With all his focus locked on Ale, the goblin left his left side wide open, and even though he knew he couldn't slice it, he figured he could still line up a shot for the head. So he launched himself into the air and slammed its head with everything he had. And right as he braced for impact, his sword snapped clean in two, shattering everything he expected, and the goblin had still managed to slash open his shoulder. Right then, he caught sight of eerie green flames licking along the Gotland's sword. The goblin yanked him by the neck and hoisted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Chamber was left completely stunned. How on earth could a goblin be this strong? Even though he was sure leveling up over, and over had made him stronger than ever. He knew this enemy was on a whole other level. Adelina's entire team was already wiped out, and he couldn't shake the fear that he'd be next. Then he spotted Ale behind the monster, still down on the floor, sobbing her heart out. He realized that if he went down right now, Il would die too. After he got banished and left with nobody, she stepped in and teamed up with him. Even though she barely knew his real side, she still trusted him enough to follow. And that's when he vowed to protect her, no matter what it cost. So he grabbed the goblin's face and slammed a light spell straight into it. The goblin got blinded by the flash, and while he was scrambling to shield his eyes, the chamber room, the moment he hesitated, Vale shot over to him and ordered her, "Get back up." The goblin couldn't see a thing, so he flailed his sword blindly, hacking at the air like it owed him answers. As the two of them booked it and burst out of the forest, they didn't look back. They finally tear back to the rumble. And at last, he bursts into the Adventurers Guild. Watching them both get absolutely wrecked, battered from head to toe. Nako rushed in and glanced at him, then saw just how much blood was pouring out. She shot out for help right away, but Chambers slammed the brakes and told her they had to report everything to Surinway first. Right after he said that, Surinmi barged downstairs and told him, "We'll talk about this later." First, they scrambled to patch up his wounds. After they finished getting treated, Serini hauled both of them into a room, and that's where they finally ran into another man. His name was Dingle, Guild Master of Rumble, and he told them to chill because he was about to lay it all out. He couldn't shake the feeling that the black goblin they just stumbled on in the forest was somehow cursed, or even blessed, by some evil god. "There's a goddess named me. My kind is the only power on this continent that grants humans skills." Then he leaned in and said that truth only held for humans. Just like humans had their own god, every other race had theirs too, and that even included the monsters. They called themselves evil gods, and humans wouldn't even dare to bow to them. He was convinced that the black goblin they were fighting wasn't just any creature. It was blessed by the monster god, Azidahaka, and that blessing let it steal power like a copy of their own skills. Once Chamber heard that, it all clicked. Now he understood why that goblin was so blasted fast and nearly impossible to break. Dingel insisted it wasn't some enemy they could have dealt with at their level in the first place. Serenity even threw in an apology for dumping him out there with zero answers, but he never saw it spiraling like this. The guilds were already calling for reinforcements over the King Goblin, so they decided to leave the Black Goblin to the others too. So he leaned in and promised him the guild would take over from here, then told him to shut the door on this request for now. Chambers sat there, fists clenched, convinced his mission was a total failure, because part of him still swore he'd gotten stronger. He was still helpless, and he just didn't have the skills to pull it off. But then he glanced at Ale, still shaking with terror, and dread hit him hard. She couldn't move while the people who once were her comrades stood there and died in front of her, and admitting that he'd failed. That frustration burned in his chest like fire. But he finally saw the truth. There was nothing left he could do right now. Then out of nowhere, Al threw an apology at him, right there and then. It hit him hard and left him utterly baffled. She was convinced that if she hadn't pushed to keep the investigation going, all of this never would have spiraled into chaos. If Adelina and the others had just stayed tucked away in that cave, they'd still be alive, but nope, because she couldn't stop pushing forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was all on her, until Chamber snapped back, "None of this is true. None of it is your fault." Then she slammed the truth down. Adelina only got hurt because she stepped in to protect her, and in the end, she didn't see it as heroism at all. She just called Adelina useless. The second she said it, every single person in the room snapped silent for a beat. After everyone who tried to shield her kept getting brutalized, she snapped and swore, "I never want this to happen again." Then Chamber leaned in and told her, "If you truly believe that about yourself, I'm right there with you. I'm in the exact same boat." He got utterly crushed in that fight, couldn't land a thing, couldn't do a single useful move. Ale snapped that it was totally wrong, because he'd saved her countless times. Then he fired back, "I feel the exact same way." He reminded her, shouting over the chaos, that it was only her light arrow slicing into the black goblin that kept him standing there, alive. Turns out she saved him too. Adventurers kept teetering on the edge of disaster, knowing death could strike any second. That's exactly why they always had each other's backs, because that's what a real party is for. So he looked them in the eye and swore he'd be the kind of adventurer willing to bet his life just to keep his friends safe. Hale was so stunned by what he heard that his mind went blank. But he also knew the truth. At his current level, he couldn't save a single soul, so he decided to grind harder and get stronger. He truly, wholeheartedly believed that the two of them were meant to get even stronger, together. Right then it hit her, she remembered his level-up skill. And he grinned at her like nothing could touch him. He was certain that once he leveled up, he'd get strong enough to smash that black goblin for good. Ale also admitted she absolutely hated having to give up, too. She vowed to get stronger, so nobody else would ever have to throw themselves in danger just to save her. And the moment he saw her clench that fist, he instantly got exactly what she was feeling. You already know what they were about to say. There's no way you didn't. And Chamber slammed the final word down. He declared they'd close out this investigation request for good. Saranmi and Dingle couldn't believe what they'd just gotten from him. It wasn't even close to what they were hoping for. And he shot to his feet, demanding they set him up with a brand new quest. Saranmi lined in and demanded to know what kind of mission he was craving. And he told them straight up he was going to hunt down that black goblin and end it. And it hit even harder, pure shock. Dingle erupted into laughter, leaving him absolutely stunned. He soaked up the fire in his own words, then told them, "Come with me," and demanded they follow. He brought out a bunch of keys and started jiggling them like they were about to unlock something big. Saranu warned him that those keys were crucial, but he brushed it off and snapped, "Follow me." When Chamber pressed him on where they were headed, he grinned and swore it was going to be an absolutely epic place. They stormed into the basement. While Dingle wrestled with which key might fit, Suranui straight up told the Chamber that this was the guild's storage room. Dingle fought for the keys like his life depended on it, and Suranu jumped in to help him out. But rage surged through him, and he just smashed the lock wide open. He dove into the storage, hunting for answers, and Suranui shot him a warning. There were tons of valuable treasures in there. But once again, he shrugged him off completely and went hunting until he found exactly what he'd been searching for. As he burst out into the open, the dust finally swallowed behind him. Chamber shot him a worried look, then Dingle shoved a sword into his hands. His eyes nearly popped out when he realized the blade was a golden greatsword. Dingle lined in and told him the name, Thunderblade's Thor, which left him even more stunned. The second he grabbed that sword, it slammed into him how brutally heavy it was. And even when he tried, it wouldn't budge. He couldn't start it moving at all. He couldn't wrap his head around that weight, same size as his old greatsword, but it hit like it was 10 times heavier. He thought, if I'm still me after leveling up, I'd drop this thing in a heartbeat. Dingle also realized it would feel crushingly heavy on him. He told him the truth. This sword had belonged to his old comrade, a top-rank adventurer, and even though that guy was insanely strong, he still got cut down and died in battle one day. Even knowing death was coming, he still chose to risk everything to protect someone, because that was who he was, and it fit him better than being shielded. He was a total idiot, charging a dragon solo just to carve out a window for Dingle and his comrades to sprint to safety. Chamber lined in and demanded, "Why are you handing me something this important, this sword?" And Dingle suddenly remembered what he'd just said. He wanted to become an adventurer, willing to risk his own life to shield his friends. And he flat out told them he looked a lot like that man. He patted his head and told him not to sweat the small stuff, because this wasn't some freebie. It was a payment up front, right before the reward. Still reeling, Chamber shot him a question. What reward was he talking about? And he fired back that the guildmaster Dingle himself had just sent a direct order, an all-out black goblin subjugation quest. Later on, Chamber and Ale tore through a dead, deserted wasteland like there was no tomorrow. And she clocked how hard he was breathing, then shot him a worried, "Are you okay?" Right, because he'd already warned me earlier, this new sword was insanely heavy. Dingle basically shoved him into learning how to wield it for real, and now he knew it wasn't just heavy in his hands, it weighed on him in every way. But no matter what, he knew he had to level up fast, so one day he could finally master that sword. And until that moment, he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't beat the black goblins. Ale nodded right along with him, and that's exactly why they'd pushed this far. Stepping into the hunting ground of tyranny to forge his skills. The moment he stepped in, 3 goblin swordsmen were waiting, right there in front of him. He nodded along, just like the intel had predicted. They launched the assault, and Ale kicked it off by firing a glowing light arrow straight into one of the goblins. While every single one of them got completely distracted, the Chamber crept up on them and chopped down a goblin in a single vicious slash. With just one swing, he felt it. This sword was brutally heavy, and he knew that before leveling up, he'd barely be able to grip it. Still, that weight came with power. The heavier it was, the harder it struck. The sword's true power was about to awaken, right now. Now it all clicked, what Dingle told him, because this was no normal blade. It's an offensive sword that only unleashes its real power when he keeps landing back-to-back strikes. Thor is a blazing sword, swing it fast enough, and lightning explodes out of the air. And right when that power sparks with thunder, its weight suddenly feels lighter, like it's being lifted by the storm itself, which helped him crank up his speed even more. Just like that, Chamber snapped his strike in the blink of an eye and carved through another gauntlet swordsman. The harder he swung it, and the more lightning they stuffed into that storage, the more power surged, like the whole thing was about to explode. With a final slash, he cut down the last goblin swordsman, and now the real question hits, did he just take out all 3? He came running at him hard, and he couldn't believe it. This guy wiped out the whole crew of Gotland swordsmen all by himself, and when they asked how, he said it wasn't his strength at all, it was this new blade, still crackling with power. Then bam, a giant boulder slammed out of the sky and came crashing straight down on them. He snatched Ale in a split second and bolted out of harm's reach. At first, it looked exactly like some ordinary rock. He took another look at the rock, and then Chamber snapped like, yeah, it was about time they finally showed up. Turns out, the person behind it all was none other than the Dublin leader. Ale shot him a question, so this was the goal for once. He nodded and confirmed it was. Normally, one goblin swordsman would whip a pack of regular goblins into line, but if you ever saw multiple goblin swordsmen moving together, it meant the real monster was already calling the shots above them. He begged Nyako to gather the details and report back, and now it was confirmed. Everything they predicted was dead on, down to the exact location. The Galvan leaders were brutal foes, though he couldn't ignore the upside. Every win would shower them in experience points and help them level up as fast as possible. With that locked in, both of them squared up and geared themselves to take on the Gotland leader. Ale was still stunned at just how massive it was, and Chamber basically ordered her to keep it occupied so he could slip in and take it down. She kicked things off by firing a bright light arrow that it slammed into the leader's eye at the exact moment he was about to swing his sword down. The monster slammed its fist into the earth, then they finally had a chance to fall back. Chamber backed up a step, then exploded forward, charging straight at it. He couldn't land a killing blow. He only managed to slash the skull mask off the goblin leader's head. Then it launched a punch straight at him, fists first and no mercy. But he dodged it at the last second, then hit pause and scrambled for his next move. That monster's massive size and brutal combo of attacks were keeping him at arm's length, and so yeah, turns out it really was just like that. He shook off the usual routine, drew in a breath, and charged his blade with raw, unstoppable power. Dingle had warned him about this, an ultimate attack, the kind that could end everything. Once the sword hit full power and the lightning finally surged to its limit, it blasted that energy straight into the enemy chamber. as he ripped his blade through the air. With one explosive strike, all that built-up energy finally detonated at once. Then he lunged forward and slammed straight into the goblin leader. The goblin leader was absolutely blasted. It crashed down to the ground, completely defeated. Chambers' jaw dropped when he saw just how brutally powerful that attack was. It hit harder than you ever expected. Then boom, his sword suddenly felt heavy again, and it hit him. Dingle had warned him that once it dumped all that stored lightning, it would snap back to its original form. He realized that if he ever tossed that attack around recklessly, it could get him killed just as fast. Right then, both of them popped a level up message, and they both shot up to level 8. They were both stunned. Ale had leveled up twice in one shot, and it instantly clicked that the goblin leader's experience points were way better than they'd ever guessed. They cracked open their stat window and started digging through the upgrades they just unlocked. He was stunned to discover he gained a weaker healing skill, but with his magic power running low, he only got one shot, and it couldn't even bring him back properly. Then he glanced at Ale, and whoa, she was practically vibrating with excitement as she blurted that she'd finally learned it. The move she learned was called Asterisk Light Javelin Asterisk. And every priest dreamed of that spell, because it was ridiculously powerful, even stronger than Light Arrow, and when she felt the surge of power flood her, she nearly burst with joy, swearing she could finally do more in battles. When he heard her say it, Chambers snapped to himself that she was fighting tooth and nail to get stronger and finally catch up, so he urged them to head back to Rumble for a while. They'd already wiped out the boss in that area, so grinding on puny enemies was a waste of time, and he insisted they shouldn't rush into it from day one. And because they'd been living on the edge nonstop, they all needed a breather badly, and Ale was totally on board. When he finally came back to the Adventurer Guild, everyone went silent because the story hit them hard. He'd hauled out the goblin leader himself. He showed off the magic stone he snatched after beating it down, then pushed forward like, "All right, now I'm cashing this in." But Naka was still reeling and demanded to know how he managed to drop a Galvan leader with nothing but his rank. He just shrugged and said it was all the payoff of their hard work. She tried to push past it, but that answer wasn't what she wanted at all, so the two of them slid into a cozy spot and shared a drink together. And Ale admitted it had been ages since they'd last taken a sip. Rank was all fired up to see what came next, because they'd already dealt with the goblin leader, and he told her, "Just trust me," saying he had a solid lead on their next move, and told her to chill out, take a sip, and enjoy her drink for now. The very next day, the two of them sprint right back to the exact same spot in the hunting field. She demanded to know why they'd returned after they'd already crushed the goblin leader, and when he explained, he made it clear that was exactly the whole point. Like he said earlier, goblins usually hunt in packs, but the leaders don't team up. Each one rules alone, bossing their own little crew. So pack on, goblin leaders threw themselves into non-stop territorial wars. That meant one thing: now that they'd crushed the leader right there in the area, they'd finally secured the win. Then another one would come roaring in to widen its turf. Right then, Chamber heard a sound creeping up behind him. When he spun around, a goblin leader stared him down, backed by a whole swarm of goblins. Just like he'd been betting on it, then out of nowhere. Right then, another leader stepped in, straight up behind him. Turns out they'd all picked that spot to meet up, and he barely even blinked at it. To him, it felt like the perfect opening to wipe them out before they could even react. They launched their best moves at once, unleashing everything they had, and they wiped out both goblin leaders, along with their whole crews. After the dust settled, the two of them stood there, unbroken, and boom, the Chamber and Ale both leveled up to level 12. Meanwhile, back in the city, the whole world is still turning, right while everything changes. A full-blown commotion erupted, and it was impossible to ignore. And it turned out the city had already been infiltrated by goblins. Sarah knew he was stuck in his office when sudden noises rattled the door from outside, and he couldn't help but wonder what the heck was going on. Meanwhile, Dingle barely heard a thing. Right then, NACO burst into the office out of nowhere and slammed out a report too. The goblins were tearing through the streets, wreaking chaos on everyone around them, leaving both of them stunned. Dingle snapped at her to spill every detail, and she told him this. Even though D-ranked adventurers were fighting back, a goblin leader was lurking in the chaos, throwing everything off, while Sir and me still couldn't wrap our heads around why goblins would even start rampaging through the city. Dingle pressed her about whether there weren't any higher-ranked adventurers, because there was no way D-rank rookies could ever match a Baldwin leader, and she snapped back that it wasn't that simple. Ever since the Black Goblin incident, the big-shot adventurers scattered on other missions, leaving only a handful of solid mid-tier fighters behind, so Dingle figured they'd fled before anyone could stick them with that nightmare. Because even seasoned adventurers usually got sniffles, the only ones left behind were a bunch of clueless rookies in town, totally out of their depth. Rage simmered in his chest as he snapped at Sir Anu to sprint to the warehouse and snatch up whatever weapon he could get his hands on. Saranmi pressed him, "Are you really serious?" And Dingle shot back that they didn't have time to bicker because this was an emergency, straight up. Right outside, he caught sight of adventurers squaring up, desperately trying to take down a pack of goblins. And then this one girl unleashed her fireball attack, torching straight through the goblin leader. But it didn't budge one bit, it had zero effect whatsoever. And he was right on the edge of smashing her with that fist. Right then, wham, a glowing javelin slammed into the monster's back. It was Ale and Chamber, and at last, they were back in town. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Why on earth were goblins crawling through the city? Then he spotted the goblin leader's back injury, and it screamed that an adventurer hadn't done that. Still, he got the message. This had to be handled right now, so he pushed Ale to fire up that brand new technique of hers. She unleashed her enchant spell and supercharged it. He supercharged his sword strikes with the power of light. Chamber shot forward, barreling straight at them. Then he tore through those two goblin swordsmen and took them out fast. He swung in, and before anyone could even gasp, those swordsmen went down so fast that every adventurer was left staring in pure disbelief. Meanwhile, Dingle watched himself pull off those little gauntlets first, then power up his sword with lightning in the fastest, cleanest way. He couldn't believe it. He was already starting to get the hang of that sword, and it honestly impressed him. Chamber didn't just clash with the goblin leader, he went toe-to-toe with the thing head-on. He launched into a brutal strike, slicing off its leg with. And that's when the monster crumpled to the ground. Then he leapt into the air and unleashed every last spark of electricity trapped inside the. He drove his blade through the goblin leader and ended its reign for good. He erased that monster like it was nothing, leaving every single spectator staring in stunned silence. What, they weren't just impressed, everyone was hailing him right there and then. And Dingle even praised him, saying he did great. Chamber couldn't help but beam hearing it from his mouth. When Sir Indy finally stumbled back, gripping a hammer way bigger than his own body, and panted, "So, what am I supposed to do with this now?" Later on, they all piled into Dingle's office and shut the door behind them. At the office, Chamber laid out every detail of his level-up skill, and the moment he heard it, he went wide-eyed, blurting out, "You mean you really leveled up that much in such a short time?" And Chamber just nodded. Right away, the guild master pressed him, asking why he'd bring his skill up now. With how valuable it was, Chamber knew word would spread fast, and troublemakers would come crawling in, sniffing for an opening. He just shrugged and said, "I told you because I trust you." And when Dingle demanded, "Why do you trust them so much?" he shot back that it was nothing but a gut feeling. That moment stunned both Dingle and Suranu into complete silence. He erupted into laughter because he genuinely loved the guy's brutal honesty and admitted that his own judgment about people wasn't that bad after all. He told them that the moment he looked at both of them, he couldn't stop his mind from going right back to that thought. And just like that, the two of them suddenly got shy, like they didn't know what to do with themselves. But after all that, Dingel leaned in and demanded to know what he really thought about the goblin leader he'd just crushed out on the streets. Goblins are usually skittish and fiercely territorial, so stepping outside their own turf is almost unheard of. Chamber nodded along and admitted he was dying to know too, especially why that goblin leader already had scars piled all over him, and Dingle was sure there had to be a real reason behind it. He couldn't believe this was happening, nothing like it had ever happened before, and the only thing that popped into his mind was whether the black goblin was behind it all. Saran hurried to the chamber and demanded, "Have you seen that black goblin attack anyone else too?" And once he confirmed it, yeah, so you can bet the black goblin isn't being treated like a real ally by the other goblins, or else it's just a full-blown rampaging lunatic, smashing into anyone it can. That goblin leader probably got its territory wiped out by the black goblins, so now it's charging into the city to claim something back. If that was true, Chamber would have stared at those goblins and wondered, were they really hunting the town, or just trying to slip out alive? And Serenity admitted it was still just a theory, but she wouldn't rule out the wild possibility that it could be true. Dingle also knew they were running out of time, because once the black goblin's influence spread any farther, everything would be over, and that's exactly when he started listening. Then Chamber and Ailes fired off the same words in perfect unison. They had to shut this case down immediately. Later, the two of them grabbed their bags, locked in, and took off, ready to hit the road. Nyako was freaking out for their sake and begged them to hold on, because reinforcements from other guilds were about to roll in within just a few days. Chamber thanked her for caring so much, and he finally admitted it. This mission was brutal and dangerous, but he refused to just sit back, because if something like this could strike again soon, they had to act now, and deep down, he wanted to settle things with that black goblin himself. With that said, they stormed out of the guild, and Dingle plus the others kept waving them off, praying their mission went perfectly. Together, they charged back into the forest of Noi. And as they pushed farther in, deeper into the unknown, they were absolutely horrified when they stumbled on the carcass of a severed cave bow. He spotted the magic stone still sitting there, untouched, no bite marks at all, so it had been finished off just moments ago. Ael's stomach dropped as he wondered who in the world could have done that. The chamber already had the answer locked in, and now he was dead certain the black goblin was still lurking somewhere out here in the forest. They pressed on, and before they even realized it, they'd already plunged deep into the woods, where they had never stepped before. Suddenly, Ael's eyes snapped to a monstrous spider looming right behind her, and it absolutely terrified her into a cold, shaking silence. But before it could even react, Chamber snapped into action and sliced it clean in half. He shot her a worried look and asked, "Are you okay?" And she was so terrified she couldn't even form words, then blurted out what that creature really was, and he told her it was a paralyzed spider. But that wasn't the end. Right on top of them, a whole crew surged in, and she instantly knew this place was their territory. It bolted out of there in a hurry, then Ael caught him and asked, "Wait, do you also feel like something seriously wrong in this place?" She blurted out that since they stepped into this cursed forest, monsters had been everywhere, but not a single goblin had shown up. Now that he thought about it, even under bright daylight, this place still looked like a totally different forest. He admitted something was definitely wrong, but with no real choice left, they pushed ahead anyway, moving forward with their guard up. As they pushed deeper into the forest, deeper and darker with every step, they couldn't believe their eyes. Right there, hidden in plain sight, was a whole goblin settlement. It broke down the whole mystery. There weren't any goblins in the forest, because every single one had been herded here. But they were on full alert, and right there, inside their tents, they were hiding. So they both decided to hang back and watch for a while. And with the sun already sliding toward the horizon, he told them to finally catch their breath. Then he set up watch duty so they'd take turns keeping eyes on the night. Later that night, Ael finally caught his breath, then stayed on watch duty in the chamber. He felt the sky start to brighten, and he knew daybreak was about to hit any second. But the goblins in the settlement didn't change at all. Nothing shifted, not even a little. Suddenly, the moment he started thinking this settlement was going to give him nothing at all, everything changed. Then his eyes snapped to a black goblin creeping closer to the area, slow as danger itself. The black goblin stalked right through the settlement, unhurried and deadly. And Chamber finally clicked. This whole place was his turf after all. Then he clocked the other Gotland's reaction, and it screamed the same terror, and he jolted Ael awake right away. She hurried up and asked what was wrong, and he leaned in, told her to keep her voice down, and whispered that the black goblin had finally shown up. The instant she spotted that black goblin strutting toward her, her heart nearly stopped. A cold shiver raced down her spine, and her mind spiraled back to what he'd done, how he slaughtered Adelina and wiped out her entire party. Chamber could see the fear rippling through her as she trembled uncontrollably. And he blurted, "Hey, are you okay?" She smiled and told him, "I'm fine," but inside she was steadying her own shaking heart because she knew she couldn't fall apart. He couldn't keep playing it safe like that forever. She couldn't help wondering if that black goblin was the boss of the whole place. And sure, that might explain it, but deep down, he knew it didn't feel that simple. Something was definitely off. Right then, a black goblin pounced on a tiny little goblin hiding nearby. That was scrambling to stay out of his sight. And then he murdered it for no reason at all, which left them both frozen in shock, while another goblin tried to slip away from behind him. He grabbed it too, yanked it down just the same, and the other tiny goblins piled in after him. He watched it start to bolt, ripping away from him the second it sensed his presence. And the two of them were so lost, they couldn't even wrap their heads around what the hell was happening. Chamber finally figured it out. Those goblins weren't gone at all. They'd been cowering in the shadows, terrified of that monster the whole time. To that black goblin, family didn't exist. Humans and monsters were just different kinds of prey to him. Ael also realized the goblins in Rumble City weren't random at all. They were fleeing from him too, which is why they looked absolutely wrecked. The black goblin caused all this chaos, and they finally realized they had to stop him. No delays, no excuses. Then the monster turned and started slipping away, and both of them ditched the extra gear to follow him in total silence. They trailed him straight into the woods. They couldn't figure out where he was headed, like exactly where. But then boom, out of nowhere, the goblin froze mid-step, spun around, and glared at them with a terrifying, horrifying stare. They finally clocked it, someone had spotted them. And then he came barreling at them in a flash, intent on killing them both. But Ale instantly hurled her light javelin attack and blasted the monster straight back into the trees. Chamber's eyes widened as her attack tore through the air with unstoppable power. But she knew the celebration had to wait. The fight wasn't even close to being done. Over then the black goblin yanked off his hood like, "All right, I'm done playing," and he went all in serious. And the moment it started, the two of them bolted, sprinting as they tried to outrun him. He took off after them too, and Chambers' shock hit hard, because he wasn't just following, he was actually catching up. Now that he'd leveled up, his speed shot off the charts, so there was zero fear in him, and he was sure the goblin couldn't catch them that easily. They kept sprinting like their lives depended on it, until finally, they finally hit a dead stop and just waited, right there, while they stared at the road, hoping he'd catch up. That black goblin sensed it too, something felt off, so it spun around, scanning the area like it was hunting for danger. And then boom, he crushed a spider web under his foot. Turns out Chamber was using the paralysis spider's territory like a snare, meant to pin him down the second he stepped in. But of course it didn't even faze him. He just snapped his sword into a single, crushing swing. He smashed every web blocking his path, and honestly, Chamber barely even got slowed down. That tiny distraction was exactly what he needed, and now, with his new sword ready, he was set to smash into him. He'd been grinding his power nonstop for this exact moment, while Ale burned for her revenge too, and then. With that, he surged straight into the black goblin, determined to end this nightmare for good. Adele fired a light arrow to yank his attention away, then Chamber crashed in right after and slashed at him with his sword. The goblin fumbled the block, and the attack slammed straight through. He wiped the damage across his face, and Chamber finally started to feel his sword come alive. Now he could swing it like his old iron sword again, same weight in his hands, and that enchant light boosting it, and he could feel the power hitting on a whole other level. His opponent stood planted right in front of him, and he couldn't even guess what was going through his head, yet one thing was crystal clear: rage was boiling in his veins. The black goblin lunged in and started pounding him with pure brute force. Chamber slammed the block and smirked. Black goblins never learned a real sword swing, they just crushed you with brute strength and lightning-fast speed. He only had to stay locked onto his pace, and boom, he could shut down every single strike, plus each hit was just feeding lightning into his sword, and the more it charged, the deadlier it got. Both of them kept trading punches, blow after blow, refusing to back down. He slammed up one defense after another, crushing every single attack their opponent threw at him. Until finally, Chamber seized the advantage and drove the black goblin back with brute strength alone. That strength blew Al away, yet he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let his guard slip for even a second. Second, because the black goblin was still crouched in the shadows, clutching his secret technique like a weapon. That green flame that shattered his sword clean in half the last time they went to war. The black goblin slammed green flames across his blade at last. Chamber wasn't scared for a second. He was certain this blade wouldn't crack like it did last time. And with that in his head, he launched straight at the monster, and in the blink of an eye, hitting him dead on with a shot so clean it felt like the air itself snapped. He couldn't help thinking this fight was finally over. As the blade bit in, you could feel the strike lock in. But when he whipped around, the black goblin was reshaping its entire body right before his eyes. And then it morphed into a whole new, terrifying shape. Chamber blurted, "Get back," and clocked the danger in his head as Ale started to move. What the hell is going on, and is this dark god's doing? He couldn't stop thinking, what in the world was he supposed to do next when, out of nowhere, the monster vanished from his eyes, leaving nothing but shock and silence behind. And then right in front of his face, it lunged in, shredding at him with its claws. He slammed his guard up just in time, but he couldn't wrap his head around how brutally fast that black goblin had gotten. Its speed and raw power had skyrocketed out of control. Chamber was scrambling to fend off every incoming strike, getting shoved back again and again. He knew he couldn't hold out much longer. So he tried to put distance between them, only for everything to hit him before he could even react. The black goblin was on him in an instant, claws raised, ready to crush him. Right then, Ale lunged in, saved him, and blasted the monster straight in the face with her glowing light javelin. That geek fought for air right in that exact moment. But she snapped at him to stay sharp, as the black goblin lunged in for another brutal attack. This time, the chamber slipped the blow like it had eyes. He backed up in a flash and froze in shock when even a direct light javelin hit did absolutely nothing to him. But Ale quickly noticed the truth. His face was bruised to hell, and yeah, it definitely cost him some damage. So she didn't slow down. She lunged back in and kept spamming that light javelin at him nonstop. With blinding speed, the black goblin snapped out of every attack, and not a single scratch touched him. Chamber couldn't track his moves anymore, like the next move was slipping out of his hands. Like he was going full beast mode right on the spot. With everything crashing down on him, he chose to fight in his real form, like a tank that wouldn't budge, then snapped, Ale, hunt for a crack in its defense while I draw its focus. He bulldozed forward with his sword, raised high while. As the black goblin dodged his strike and fired back with a brutal counter. Counterattacked in a flash, claws blazing forward. The chamber slammed shut and blocked it. And as the opening flashed, Ale hurled a fresh, light javelin straight at the monster. He pushed on and slashed the black goblin with his blade. Instantly, it sprang back, barely dodging a deadly hit. Then his body started bleeding out, and the moment they realized what that chamber proved, motivation hit them hard, because if they kept pushing like this, they could finally end it. Chamber realized that even with its moves feeling weird and tricky, it was suddenly fighting on pure emotion, making its attacks way too easy to read. He and Ale can tear through enemies at any distance, right up close or from far away. And because they'd been leveling up side by side this whole time, he could feel their power hitting at the exact same rhythm. And yeah, with hope blazing that the battle was finally theirs, he tore forward again, charging straight at the monster, while they kept trading brutal blows. While Ale hurled her light javelin from far away. Even when it managed to shove it back for a moment, Chamber kept the pressure locked on it. And then, little by little, he finally saw the damage like they were wearing it down with every single hit. They just had to stay on their toes, keep the pressure blazing, while still backing off enough to stay just out of reach. And he was sure it would be over any minute now. Then bam, everything snapped shut and slammed straight onto his face, launching an attack like it had one goal. He barely slapped the attack aside at the last second, right as she drew back to slam her light javelin into him. The black goblin clocked her instantly, then darted behind the chamber like he was her human shield, using him to hide and protect itself. Right then she locked eyes with a black goblin, and its stare pinned her in place. She went completely speechless, thoughts racing. If it was actually locking onto her and refusing to look away. Chamber kept hammering it, and the second she got an opening, she struck. She hurled her light javelinica monster straight into the fight. It slammed its arm into the attack, cutting them off, and you could tell it was already learning their moves mid-fight. Chamber could tell Ale's magic was fading fast, and he had no clue how much longer they could even keep this going. And yeah, he could clearly tell, this whole fiasco was draining the black goblin's stamina, too. His sword's thunder was cranked to the max, and he went all in on this final strike, every last ounce of power. They both surged forward and launched into each other, braced for the first strike. Then out of nowhere, the black goblin shot up into the air with a savage leap, and slipped right behind his back. It slammed down right in front of Ale, and she was the one locking in her aim right now. Now he finally stares the monsters in the face, right up close. Panic hit her like a storm, and she whipped out her light javelin attack, desperate to break the moment. But it was already too late, and before she could even blink and realize it. A black goblin lunged in and slashed her with its claws. Chamber snapped off her name as she crashed down to the ground, and the monster snapped its focus right back onto him, and launched a brutal attack at him. He slammed the block again, and rage surged through him. He surged back with a ruthless counter, aiming to slam in a fatal blow. In his head, he knew he had to act fast against this beast, because he couldn't just stand by any longer. And he kept the pressure on that black goblin, grinding it down step by step. Seeing Ale bleed out back there, he grabbed that moment like a curse and couldn't look away. He shouted to her to unleash her healing magic right now and heal herself. But she already knew this kind of wound would shrug off her healing spell like it was nothing. Still, she shot her hand out and yanked her wand into reach. She tilted the weapon toward the sky, and a spark of hope hit her, because she knew there was still one last thing she could do. She loosed a glowing light arrow straight into the sky, which snapped Chambers' attention into focus. But he had zero clue what she was up to. With his guard down, the monster lunged in and seized control. And it shredded the distance between them, clawing into open space. Chamber seethed, lunged in, and slammed a direct strike, cutting clean through its shoulder. The two of them froze for a split second, and just by looking at it, they knew. He could feel it, like the energy was starting to sputter and run out, which meant the moment was here, time for him to go all in and unleash a full-force attack. He swung his sword and blasted every last drop of electricity it had been storing. And the black goblin snapped its claws out, and green flames erupted all over them. In that instant, Chamber's eyes went wide, because it still had a trump card hidden up its sleeve. But none of that mattered anymore. He had one job: hit first before it could strike back. But before he could even raise his sword, the goblin lunged in and clawed him open in a single brutal swipe. Blood blasted from his wounds, and disbelief crushed him. Again, he couldn't keep anyone safe. He thought about Ale and shot her a broken apology for letting her down. Then, out of nowhere, he caught the pitch in that voice. His HP and MP got completely maxed out again, fully restored to the brim. And the moment he started to heal, he had zero clue what was about to hit him. At that exact moment, he spotted a dead spider, paralyzed and still, dropping from above like a bad omen. And it hit him hard as he finally understood what just happened. Cut to a flashback in the paralyzed spider forest. Ale's divine message skill lit up, and she blurted out exactly how many experience points they'd need to level up next. She confirmed both of them were stuck at level 30, while Chamber hunched over his calculations, figuring out how many monsters they had to grind through to reach the next one. Hale said they should keep what they learned to a bare minimum, so if things spiral out of control, leveling up will refill their HP and MP completely, full recovery, no mercy. So it became their secret weapon for when everything hit the fan. He also made it crystal clear: no monster fights, no experience, so they had to hunt in a spot where tiny monsters were easy to spot, with zero interruptions. Ale pointed to this spot by the paralyzed spider's nest, and when he said it might be perfect for the plan, he nodded like it was settled. Now back in the present, while his wounds finally started healing, he realized she never forgot the plan, even in a moment like this. He snapped back on his feet. He snatched his sword and charged straight at the black goblin with everything he had. It took a brutal hit, blood exploded out of its body, but it only cranked up his rage even higher. And it lunged at him like a wild beast. Every time it swung, Chamber slipped his way past each and every attack. He even mocked it to his face, sneering that those pathetic attempts weren't going to touch him anymore. And as the goblin lunged at him again, it came charging in for one more strike. It got slammed by a light javelin coming from right behind. Ale snapped back to her feet, totally healed. And Chamber lit up with relief when he saw her. Right when the monster started to turn its focus onto her, Chamber lunged in and tore the attack at it, and even after it managed to block him, he didn't stop. He kept pressing forward. He wouldn't let up. He kept hammering at it, then slashed through from the side. He admitted it was brutal, and somehow it still hadn't gone down yet. But he and Ale stood shoulder to shoulder. They finally decided it was time to smash the fight to dust, once and for all. The two of them ramped up their power and unleashed their attacks at the same time. And as the black goblin barrels in at them, its claws snapping forward, side by side they unleash a brutal barrage of attacks and slam the blow straight onto its target. That led to a massive explosion that lit everything up. When the dust finally cleared, the monster was obliterated completely, gone for good. And just like that, they finally crushed the black goblin for good. The two of them were completely shell-shocked, still unable to wrap their minds around what they just pulled off. But before they could even celebrate, everything was snatched away. They snapped back into a defensive stance when they realized they were totally boxed in by a roaring swarm of goblins. There were tons of them, and the two of them went back and forth, digging into everything. Taking down that black goblin felt like a real win, but Chamber didn't even flinch. Goblins could swarm him 100 at a time, and it wouldn't even faze him. He'd cut through every last one because he'd just leveled up. Then right out of nowhere, the ground started trembling under their feet, and the whole forest trembled like it couldn't take it anymore. When they finally looked up, pure disbelief hit them like a truck. They looked up and a gigantic monster loomed over them, staring them down. As it surged toward them, everyone realized there it was, a goblin. But this wasn't some ordinary goblin. It was the king goblin, straight up the big boss himself. They froze in disbelief when the boss of the whole settlement showed up right in front of them. And it came down hard, trying to stomp on them and crush them flat. But they barely managed to dodge because just one stomp wrecked everything, and the moment they saw it, they knew if that hit them, it was over. The king goblin lunged to snatch them, but Chamber burst in front and shoved Ale back just in time to keep her safe. But just when she was supposed to get it, he got captured instead. He couldn't break free from its crushing grip. He was trapped with nowhere to go. And he could feel it. If this kept going, he'd be done for. He didn't even get a chance to breathe before a voice cut through and promised, "Don't worry, we'll handle the rest." In a split second, the king's head went flying clean off his body, and the chamber crashed down hard onto the ground. He froze in disbelief. Turns out the one who rescued him and slaughtered the king goblin was Jane. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Jane just calmly apologized for making him wait, like that was supposed to be enough. Ale barreled up to him, blurted out, "Are you okay?" and immediately offered to heal him. But then Jane sprinted up to him and hit him with the extra heal spell, wiping every wound away in the blink of an eye. Ale's jaw dropped when she realized the person standing in front of her was casting a top-tier healing spell, and grilled him hard, asking who he really was, because this wasn't just about the extra heal spell. He also dropped the king goblin with one brutal strike. Right before Jane could even open her mouth, a lady cut in and warned him low-level monsters were still lurking right around them. Her name was Dragwell, say it like you mean it. And Jane told the two of them, "Go get some rest, I'll handle the rest of the monsters." That little moment grated on Chamber, because the way he was acting, so high and mighty, made me want to see what he'd pull next. Right then it clicked. Nyako must have been talking about this exact moment, the extra support finally racing in. He could already tell Jane had grown a ton since the last time he saw him, but he couldn't rest until he knew the exact amount. Jane and Drywell charged straight up to the goblins and stopped right in the middle of them. Right when the monsters surged into strike, he snapped his chain lightning spell into action. With a snap of his finger, he blasted every goblin rushing him with electricity. Then they all sizzled and dropped in the blink of an eye. The ones left standing went pale with fear. This Drywell wasn't about to let them slip away. She hurled a tiny bomb at the ones sprinting to escape, and still a few goblins slipped through, and they barreled at Jane, snapping forward to strike. With one vicious swing, Jane wiped every single one of them out in an instant, like it was nothing at all. He slid his sword back into place and flicked his hair into perfect order, smooth as silk. "So take a breath, apologize to Chamber again, and promise you won't keep him waiting like that ever again." While me and Ale just froze there, staring him down like, wait, is he seriously for real? Chamber leaned in and told her their real destination, and she shot back instantly. There's no way that can be true. Later, they all piled into a tavern, and Jane teased him about how long it had been since he'd last had a drink with him. They'd throw these absolutely insane drinking battles, and Chamber still couldn't forget it. He never once managed to beat them. Talking about the past, he leaned in and asked what was going on with Martha and Naoru lately, then immediately thought, yeah, he really didn't want to run into them again. Jane told him straight up that the moment he left, the two of them called it quits too, and deep down, he couldn't even argue because he'd always felt like he didn't belong with them. Meanwhile, Drywell kept pushing for more drinks, clearly nowhere near finished. Chamber was totally stunned by what he saw in her personality, and Jane snapped the truth into place. He wasn't just meeting her, he was teaming up with her as the new Dawn. Chamber lit up, bragging that his party had gotten one seriously unique pick, and right when he said it, Jane jumped in, telling him her name was the Dragon Priestess, the one who guards the Holy Sword. He didn't stop there, he kept talking, saying that the moment he drew the Holy Sword, she recognized him as the new wielder, while Chamber just crumbled, because all these wild twists hit his brain like a brick wall. So he listened to it all, and right then he admitted the truth. He'd thought he was crushing it, until he compared himself to Jane's stories and realized he was nothing but a goblin hunter. But then Jane leaned in and told him, straight up, that none of it was true. He could tell he'd leveled up for real. He took down the Forest-blessed one and wiped out a Gotland swordsman, absolute monster feats, and yeah, all that praise made him squirm a little. Then it hit him what he'd just said, and he snapped, asking Jane if that black goblin was truly nothing more than a goblin swordsman powered by the evil god's blessings, and she confirmed it. Chamber finally figured it out, so that's why he never leveled up, even after he crushed something terrifying and got absolutely 0 experience points. But for now, let's move on. Jane made it crystal clear, his growth wasn't only about getting stronger. He finally clocked it, once they reported the whole mess to the Rumble Guild, and he saw everybody lose their minds over him. He'd turned into the one person everybody needed, right now. After he showered Chamber with praise, embarrassment crashed over him, like if that guy was saying it, then there was no way he hadn't grown. Jane told him to stop doubting himself and to trust his own worth. Then he set his cup down with a hard clink and said, right there and then, that there was something he had to talk to him about. Chamber couldn't stop wondering what on earth was happening when Ailes. They crept up on him from behind and jumped him, so hard the fear ripped through his whole body. Turns out she couldn't hold her liquor again. She slipped right back into her drinking state. He snapped at her to stop, but she kept pushing, insisting he come drink with her anyway. He then shot Jane a look, asked what he was about to tell him, but the moment he saw the two of them together, he just grinned and waved it off. It's nothing. He swore he'd work his tail off to match up to him, but Chamber didn't buy it. He grilled him like, "Are you messing with me or what?" Jokes aside, he swore he wouldn't back down, and one day, he'd stand shoulder to shoulder with him. With that, the two of them erupted in cheers for how far they'd come. The next morning, his whole body was wrecked, hungover out of his mind. And just like that, Sir Enmy could tell, this guy was in for one wild night. He rushed over to apologize, but the manager waved it off fast, because hey, they were the heroes who just saved Rumble City. Chamber couldn't shake the feeling that taking all the credit wouldn't sit right, so he pointed out that in the end Jane was the one who wiped out the King Goblin, but certainly insisted the guild still praised his and Ailes' accomplishments just as hard. But then he cut through everything and went straight for the heart of it, asking them if they were. They couldn't wait to get out of this town, which left them both completely stumped. He told them Dingle was already drafting their letter of introduction, ready to bulldoze right into that guild. Bolda towered over Rumble, and the monsters around it were vicious, but Bolda was sure this time they wouldn't have to worry anymore. He could already feel it. Rumble's monsters weren't just tough anymore, they were too weak for them to bother with now. So he did it again. He pushed the question on them, asking if they were ready to bail on this city and climb up to the next level. Later, the two of them finally slammed into the gates of Bulldoze City, and right at that moment, the guards were like, "We've got two." The guard grilled them about whether they were adventurers, and Chamber didn't even argue. He just flashed the card Dingle had handed him, and once the guard saw it was legit, he stepped aside and let them into the city. The second they stepped into the city, both of them froze, because this place was nothing like Rumble. The streets were insanely wide, and packed so tight with people that it felt like the whole city was moving at once. He'd never laid eyes on so many wild foods before, and every single bite-level detail hit him like pure wonder. He couldn't shake the feeling that this city was about to blow his world open, and it was all because Serenity had pointed him in the right direction. They'd even heard the town was split in two, nobles on the east side, while the commoners were trapped behind a towering wall. He told the Chamber crowd that the best shops had to be on the east side, and that's where all the real talented craftsmen were sure to be gathering, brewing ale and all. He nodded along to her words, and if they wanted any gear, he was sure they needed to bolt straight to the east side. But then Ale pressed him, straight up, why he'd come there in the first place. She was convinced he had to be itching to go with Jane. He confessed that at first he did consider teaming up with him, but then he knew he'd slip back into leaning on him again, just like those old days. He wanted to grow with her at their own pace, and honestly, she felt relieved hearing that, so they both decided to hit the guild first. The second they stepped into the Adventurers Guild, everything changed. They got greeted by two stunning young ladies, and the whole scene instantly felt electric. Chambers stared at them, utterly spellbound, while Ailes just coughed hard, yanking him back to reality. His nerves exploded, and he rushed to introduce himself before he could lose his nerve. And just like that, the lady demanded he follow her, because she'd already heard all about him from Dingle. Because he was stuck at C rank as an adventurer. She'd already cooked up not one but two quests for him, ready and waiting. Before he agreed, she slammed the brakes and warned him. These two quests were huge, tied directly to the deadly threat Boulder was dealing with right now. He froze when she said that, then shot back. Is it really that important? Because if it's so crucial, why in the world are you handing it over to some newcomer like me? She just said Dingle told her that the two of them wouldn't die, no matter how reckless the quests got, and right at that moment, when things flipped, Dingle's head started cursing the old man. Still, he quickly peered at the quests, and they were wild. An attack on trait caravans, a mysterious monster lurking in the northern Boulder region, and even a kidnapping incident tied to wyverns. He remembered just how vicious wyverns could be, straight-up terrifying foes. It left both of them feeling a little off, but they snapped back fast, reminding each other they'd grown a ton, and this was the perfect chance to prove it. No hesitation, they grabbed the quest and accepted. When they finally reached the spot where the merchant convoy got wrecked, he clocked something worse. The monster-repelling road had been smashed too. Then he stared at Ale, and she looked totally thrown off, all stuffy like something just didn't click. He blurted out what she was thinking, and she shot back that she'd already figured they'd end up having to fight the wyverns. The best lie he could scrounge up was this. He swore he'd trained before ever daring to face a wyvern, and they needed a warm-up first, because Suranui had already warned them. This city hits way harder than anything they'd seen back in Rumble. Ale leaned in, teasing him hard, and asked if he was actually terrified of the monsters stalking this city. But he wouldn't budge for a second. He kept insisting they had to take action and do the right things to make it happen. Right then, from that busted cart sitting on the road, they suddenly heard frantic animal noises. He couldn't stop wondering, was this cart pulled from that attacked convoy? And he peeked inside, trying to figure out what was roaring in there. A round, ball-like thing came rolling out of nowhere and slammed straight into his face. It turned out to be a sheep-like creature, and Chamber was furious, especially after it nailed him in the face. But Ale found it insanely cute, and it instantly melted her heart. She couldn't get enough of it, her hands were itching to pet it. But then she suddenly realized something was terribly off with it. Chamber leaned in and told her, "Don't let it fool you, cute as it looks, it's still a monster." But she still closed the distance, because the thing clearly looked like it was in pain. Hurt clenched her ribs, so she rushed to soothe the creature, whispering that everything was going to be okay. Right then, she felt it snap into place, and she instantly whipped out her wand. She heard a sharp rustle spilling out from the bushes, and the Chamber stepped up in front of her, braced to take on whatever was coming next. But then bam, they got swarmed by huge, sheep-shaped monsters. He couldn't stop wondering if those people were the kids' friends, or maybe something like that. But to their complete shock, the monsters started kicking it around like a toy ball for them to play with. It felt awful watching the little one get crushed, and I snapped, "Why are you hurting my Chan like this?" All Chamaran just couldn't stop wondering, what kind of name was that anyway? The monsters snapped their focus onto them, and he figured out these had to be the very same monsters terrorizing that caravan. They launched straight at the two of them, and Chamber snapped into motion, claiming the lead. And the second he saw it going full reckless, he snapped in and drove it with a vicious. He slammed his fist into the monster's body and drove the hit home so hard it shook. It shot backward and smacked into every other one in the line like a ping-pong ball. Bam, bam, bam. Something felt horribly wrong to Chamber, because that attack didn't hit him quite right, it was off. Ale couldn't believe it. He praised him for clearing every last one with a single strike. But he wasn't convinced, because then, out of nowhere, he noticed the monsters right in front of him started getting hit with something, like their fate was changing in real time. It finally burst free, and whatever crawled out of it left both of them staring, stunned. Now a massive, bull-like beast charged into the scene, and Chambers suddenly realized that fluffy fur had soaked up his attack long before. They'd all stripped off their fur, and he couldn't help wondering if this was really what they looked like underneath. Then a wild thought hit him. What if all that protective fur was gone? Would they basically be able to survive exactly one hit now? So he decided to find out on the spot and ordered Ale to blast them with her ranged attacks. She hurled a blazing light javelin at one of them, and in the blink of an eye, the monster dropped hard. His theory was dead on, and once that truth hit, fear simply had nowhere left to hide. No fear left in him. He started slaughtering those monsters left and right. Once he finally cracked the way to fight them, they stopped feeling scary and crumbled under his control. And the two of them wiped them all out like it was nothing, not even a bead of sweat. After that, they inspected the cart, and when they found no trace of the caravan, they knew the only thing that made sense. The crew had slipped back to the city. He even told them to turn back toward Boulder City, but that little monster was still sitting there, sobbing through the pain. Ale burst over and healed it with her magic. Magic surged through the air, and Chamber snapped the warning again. This thing wasn't tame, it was still a monster. She finally admitted he was right, but the moment she saw how its own kind tore into it, guilt crushed her, because that strange look and color didn't just mark it as different, they screamed it had been bullied over and over. And she knew that crushing sting way too well, the pain of watching her peers move on without her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pleaded, "Keep this one between us." When he caught that look in her eyes, his mind went totally blank. He had no clue what to say. He remembered legends about adventurers who could sick monsters into battle alongside them, but that magic only worked with the beast master skill, and neither he nor the other had it. Once the little one finally healed and got back on its feet, it stared up at him with bright, sparkling eyes, and the system locked in, calling it a one-of-a-kind specimen. Offered him a choice, would he want to take it as his companion? He froze when that message hit, while the sheep kept staring him down with those glittering eyes, practically vibrating with anticipation for him to respond. He stared at the impossible and thought, no way a regular guy like me could pull this off, unless I had monster tamer skills to back it up. But deep down, he knew better than anyone. at this stage, expecting common sense from his level-up skill was totally pointless. He couldn't stop thinking, should he really team up with a monster as an ally, or was that a mistake? But then he caught the sheep staring at him, grinning so bright it felt like it was glowing. And while Ale was at it too, she was pulling the exact same move. So he threw in the towel and nodded, agreeing to take it in. He slammed the confirm button, and just like that, the one and only angry sheep was locked in, and Ale went absolutely wild with happiness. The system kept insisting it was a one-of-a-kind species, and Ale couldn't help wondering if it even had anything to do with the Dark God's blessing, because this was the first he'd ever heard of it. Then the system demanded a name, and Ale went all in, determined to call it Mai-chan. So he didn't argue with her, he just nodded and confirmed the name as the next target, then he yanked open the stats window. And the numbers on that monster were straight up wild, like seriously impressive. Even though it was only level 1, its HP was way higher than Nail's, and that shock hit him hard, because if it was packing that much durability, then this monster could totally make a damn solid tank. But for now he strode up to her, flashed a greeting, and shook her hand, which made me freaking happy too. And just like that, they turned on their heels and headed straight back to the guild. After that, he rushed in and spilled every detail to the guild receptionist, how a whole flock of furious sheep tore into the merchant caravan. She spotted the thing beside him, then leaned in and asked, "So the little monster's with you now?" But then his nerves exploded, because he had no idea how to tell her why he was dragging a monster around with him. Before he even got a word out, she snapped, "So you're a monster tamer too, or are you just pretending?" With no other excuse left to cling to, he nodded and admitted, "That's exactly what I'm here for," and she slid a ring into his hand. Called the tainting ring, the proof that the monster was finally tamed, and Ale couldn't get enough of how ridiculously cute Mai looked wearing it. Then she demanded the ring fee, and he immediately figured, of course she'd slap a charge on something like that too. All right, he finally bid the guild goodbye, and as they cut across the street he pushed, "Let's head back to the inn for now." Ale couldn't stop wondering if they could really slide back into their usual routine now that Mai was in the party too. Now that they had the taming ring, he figured they'd be fine. If it didn't work, they'd just move on and search somewhere else because this city was huge. And so, after getting shut down by a whole stack of places, at last an old man stepped forward and took them in. Even though his place looked run down and it made both of them squirm with discomfort, at least they weren't turned away, they were allowed to stay there. They stayed there all night, and the next morning it was finally time for Mai's training, until they spotted a wild deer roaming the fields. He was convinced that would be the perfect opponent to put Mai's skill to the test, and he leaned in asking, "You ready?" She started shaking her head right away, and the deer's presence terrified her to her bones. He couldn't wrap his head around why she was freaking out, because honestly, the wild deer should have been the weaker one compared to the furious sheep. He leaned in and asked, "Doesn't it embarrass you to be terrified of someone weaker than you?" Then he shoved her with urgency, trying to kickstart her into action. But right then she misstepped, and bam, slipped and started tumbling downhill like the world yanked her away, charging straight into the wild deer's territory. The deer panicked, thought she was about to strike, and then, before she could, launched an attack of her own. Then he snapped her up into the air, spinning her like a damn ball. Chamber and Ale knew the time for standing back was over. They had to step in right now. Right when they were seconds away from launching their attack. He spotted me dropping out of the sky, then I hit the ground hard. And she slammed down so hard, the ground erupted in dust everywhere. When the smoke finally cleared, turns out she crashed straight onto a wild deer's back and wiped it out before she even realized what she'd done. Both of them went wide-eyed, one wild deer was down, and Mai just stood there, totally unbothered, like nothing at all had happened. He couldn't believe it, she just shrugged off a wild deer's direct charge like it was nothing, and then she won on pure luck, like the universe flipped a coin, and her tank skills were honestly unreal. And that seal of proof told everyone Chamber's instincts were dead on. She could become a god-tier tank, but right now, all they needed was for her to ignite her fighting spirit. So they charged into the next enemy, and Hale couldn't help but frown. He asked if Mike really could take this one solo. And he told her straight up, "You've got to face this alone, prove to yourself you can do it, and watch your confidence explode." And honestly, her opponent was only a slime, the kind of weak monster everyone treated like nothing, the so-called king of the weakest. He pushed her to rise through victories, so he threw her straight at the weakest monster of all time. Terrified at first, she tentatively reached for it. Then when she saw how it reacted, she couldn't stop and started poking it over and over again. And even Chamber couldn't figure out what the hell she was even trying to pull. Then the slime totally lost it. Then it slammed into her body first, and that shock hit both him and Ale, making them instantly worry that she might not be okay. But once again, she just stood there like none of it ever happened. Chamber stared in shock as she ate a full-body slam like it was nothing. No flinch, not even a blink like the attacker was just some sloppy slime. Once it clung to her, she snapped into motion, spun like a whirlwind, then blasted it off her in one brutal throw. She barreled forward and slammed into the slime head-on, driving straight through it. He splattered it across the rock. Finally, she found her spine, and her laugh came out bold, like she meant it. Chamber couldn't stop wondering, was she really just bullying anyone weaker than her? After that, once she finally found her confidence, her growth exploded, fast, unstoppable, and right on the rise. And she charged straight into wave after wave of monsters, yet leveling up needed way more experience points than it took the two of them. Her power boost was straight up unreal. Pair that insane HP with her damage reduction skill, and she was turning into a legit, full-fledged tank. Later, once they finally rolled back into the city, even the guards lit up with smiles when they saw her. He leaned in to ask her how she was holding up, then slid an offer in like, take this. A cucumber as a treat, and turns out they went wild for it, like it was the best thing they'd ever tasted. Even so, she wasn't the only one. Somehow, almost the whole town ended up loving her, and they showered her with treats like it was a daily ritual. She blew up into a full-on celebrity in Bluto. And the reason was simple. Every tame monster people kept by their side looked pure death, snarling and intimidating, but me, she smiled like a sweetheart, and that contrast made everyone fall in love with her. Whenever they hit the city, getting back to the inn turned into a near-constant fight, and still, she saved him money on food, so yeah, it was chaos with perks. Later that night, they slipped into a loud tavern like they were chasing trouble. And when Ale saw their party finally clicking into place, joy hit like a wave, and Chamber was just as relieved, thrilled that Maya was holding her ground and shaping herself exactly the way he'd pictured. Now that they were finally ready, he knew it was time to grab that quest and go toe-to-toe with the Stumwyverns. Meanwhile, in Bluto's brutal southwest mountain zone, deep inside a cave, everything was waiting to explode. Dozens of tiny creatures scattered and sprinted for their lives, fleeing whatever was coming. Turns out that cave wasn't empty, it was crawling with a dragon. And a shadowy hooded man stalked right up to it. The dragon blasted him with a furious breath of fire. But the man juked out of the way like it was nothing. And he slammed down right onto its head. He drove the blade straight into its face, and just like that, dropped the dragon instantly. As the dragon hit the ground, lifeless and still, suddenly a surge of light snapped back into its eyes, and with that, it jolted back to life. The story whips right back into the chamber, where the ale is waiting. And as they pushed deeper into their hunt for the Weaver, she could see it, Mai was getting wiped out fast, like the fight had finally started draining her. Now that you mention it, they'd been running without a real break for ages, so I couldn't help wondering if Yasta was even feeling okay. She told him she was totally fine, because after her level up, her stamina had shot up way more than she expected. That's when he started to worry, was Maya burning out because her level was so low? So he pitched a brutal fix, force her to level up, scare Ale into backing off, and get Maya back in the game. But yeah, he was just messing around, and they all agreed to pause right there for a breather. She clocked that he was totally lost in his head, then leaned in and demanded to know what he was thinking. And then he pointed it out, something felt off, because they hadn't run into nearly as many monsters as the road should have had. Once he said it, she instantly felt it too. This eerie quiet felt exactly like the stillness they'd lived through back in the forest of Noi. But he snapped at her to drop it, and for a little while, they finally shut their eyes and rested. Later, once they were finally ready to hit the road and move out. But then, out of nowhere, Chamber caught a brutal scream ripping through the mountains. The sound blasted down from the mountaintop, and they couldn't help but wonder, was it a wyvern? It sounded brutal, like a broken sob ripping through the air, full of pure heartache. And he could only think something wild and strange had to have gone down. So the three of them locked onto its trail and followed it, ready to find out what the heck was happening. They push ahead, hearts pounding with every step. They stumbled into the mountains and locked eyes with a razor-sharp panther, one Leo wasn't about to forget. Chamber couldn't wrap his head around it. What on earth was Leo doing with a panther when they said the monsters up in those mountains were supposed to be lower ranked? Up until this moment, they'd seen 0 monsters. Then, out of nowhere, a C-rank monster stood right in front of him, and he froze in pure shock. Then my footsteps, they just got louder, like I was stepping up for real. And she was ready to tear into Panther Leo the moment the fight sparked. He couldn't help but feel proud. She was charging straight into the front lines, alone, like she owned the battlefield. He hauled her uphill from behind too, and she barreled forward, while the panther, Leo, snapped at her from the back, trying to strike. She surged back, and before he could strike, she smashed the move first, driving him straight into the wall. The chamber was blown away by how brutally intense that slam was, and he and Ale kept charging in right beside her, backing her up all the way. Once the fight finally ended, he grabbed my shoulders and praised me for the sheer bravery I showed. He couldn't believe it. Her damage reduction was unreal, because she even stood her ground against the panther Leo's claws, and he was already sure she'd be a key member of his party, until suddenly. Then right when it mattered, he heard the level-up voice roar in his head. He leveled up, and right then, boom, he unlocked the party enhancement ability. It was brand new, and he had zero clue what it even did. Then a screen blasted open in front of them, begging him to pick a member to level up their party. He had no clue what it might do, so he grabbed the risk himself, declaring himself the test subject and slamming his own name on the list. Suddenly, a blinding beam of light swallowed him whole. This light hit him like something was seriously off, and he couldn't look away as. The stats weren't even in the same universe as the boost he'd get on level up, and when it hit, his whole body went light, like gravity suddenly disappeared. Right then, a monster lunged up behind him, and he grinned, because this was the perfect target to test drive his brand new power. He taunted the monster to its face, daring it to charge him. Then it lunged at him, stabbing his way with those needle-sharp hands. But he slipped past every single one with insane ease, because he'd gotten so light, and he could feel his power surging too, like his body was leveling up in real time. The monster shot upward into the air, and he couldn't help but wonder, if his body felt this light now, could he fly too? And when he finally faced that monster, he realized he could. He launched it into the air and cleaved it clean in half, finishing it for good. After that, he couldn't resist. He fired up the new feature on Ale too. And the second he picked her name, green light burst out of her, and she instantly felt raw power tearing through her veins, because right then, another monster showed up, ready to be the first victim of her new abilities. And the instant she hurled the light javelin at it. Its power had surged so hard it blew her mind. She watched it obliterate the monster in a single strike, then burst into flames the moment it hit. Chambers started realizing that feature was basically a straight-up power boost for them, and then he couldn't help wondering what would happen if he used it on me too. But right then, Ale spotted something weird bursting to life on the mountain peak, and his gut told him this wasn't just wyverns up there. He prayed it wasn't worse, but he knew they still had to be ready for a brutal clash, the kind that hit them before against those black goblins. Ale could feel the worry creeping in, and it was starting to get serious. When he spotted that, he leaned in and promised her, "With this party, we can take down a wyvern for sure. If things spiral and it turns dangerous, we just fall back to the city." Ale nodded, and the next morning, they set out for the summit. The very next day, the three of them charged up the mountain, and the summit was right there, almost in their hands. They got ambushed by yet another panther Leo, right in their path. But when he finally leaned in for a closer look, his blood went cold. This one was nothing like the last, because it had two heads. He went all in, even though he wanted to save every ounce of strength for the wyvern, because he knew this wasn't the kind of monster you could afford to hold back against. Ale thrust his blade forward and drenched it in light magic. And then he exploded into motion, sprinting straight at the two-headed panther. But then right before he could even blink, everything snapped into motion. A shadowy force snatched up the panther in the blink of an eye, and yanked it away in the blink of an eye. A black wyvern suddenly crashed into view right in front of them. They'd never even heard rumors about a pitch-black wyvern and it hit him this could be a special case, just like mine. Still, a wild thought hit him. What if this was just like that black goblin, blessed by some evil god? Hale didn't even want to entertain that thought, but deep down it was absolutely on the table, and one thing was crystal clear. The monster staring at them was anything but normal. So they clenched their teeth, dug deep, and fought with everything they had. A wyvern shot up into the sky, right when it was about to tear into the attack, unleashing its fire breath and roasting everything in its path. Ale leaned into chamber and demanded he give her that party boost. The wyvern snapped its jaws open and blasted scorching fire straight down on them, sending the whole place up in flames, and then the fire finally died down. It finally came out. She didn't just protect them, she conjured a magical shield around their whole world and saved them. Chamber was left utterly stunned as her own surprise hit, because it actually worked, and magical barriers never take this much damage and survive, and it only worked because that party boost technique supercharged everything. Now it was time, no more waiting. They hit back full force, and she hurled a glowing light javelin straight at it, ramming a direct hit into the wyvern even as it was still soaring through the sky. The javelin slammed clean through one of its wings, but that still wasn't enough to smash it out, so it sputtered and slowly sank, hovering lower and lower until it finally couldn't fly anymore. Chambers snapped, then locked eyes with May and begged her to back him up. He hit her with the party boost skill right away, turbocharging her physical damage reduction so it shot way higher. Then he hauled his sword up and slashed the air, feeding pure lightning into the blade to power up for the strike. He launched into the air, sword crackling with power, ready to slam it into her. Because that magic barrier soaked up the lightning attack and left her standing strong. Then he snapped his sword through the air in a brutal swing. Crack, she launches a home run, and the blast whips her through the air like she's just a baseball. He christened this attack Asterisk Light in Cannonball Asterisk Asterisk, and it smashed right into the wavering face, blasting them to the ground. Hale cut him off mid-drink and grilled him, asking if the half-joking ideas he'd tossed out were really going to be taken that seriously. And he grinned, saying this was a genius idea, and that he'd been secretly drilling this move with Mai for a while now. But even with all that said, the brawl wasn't finished, so he surged forward, pressing the monster without letting it breathe. He thundered toward it, closing the distance like a weapon coming alive. The monster lunged at him. He twisted out of the way and surged straight in, closing the distance fast. He drove the blade into its already wrecked wing and cleanly ripped it apart in one brutal slice. And he shut it down for good, no more flying ever again. Then the black wyvern started to twist and shift, strange, wild patterns crawling across its entire body. The chamber jolted as those eerie green patterns crawled onto its body. And he finally understood. This monster was exactly like the black goblin he'd faced before, have the patterns been showing up exactly like he'd seen on that goblin. But none of that mattered anymore, blessing or not, so he sprang into the air and decided he'd end it right there. Even when he finally nailed a clean strike, his sword still just skidded and bounced off like it meant nothing. And he just froze, utterly stunned. The wavering's body stiffened as he spiraled over what move to make next. The monster whipped its tail at him, trying to slam him down for good. But right when it happened, Mi shot in front of him like a shield, because there was no way he'd let her get hurt. He yanked her to safety in a split second, but the attack clipped him instead, leaving him badly hurt. At least both of them were still breathing. And Ale came barreling up fast, grabbing the chance to heal him right away. He thanked her for worrying about him, but then he cut in fast, telling her it was pointless, because the wyvern's tail was loaded with poison. Her healing couldn't touch the poison already crawling through him, so he had one shot, cut it out before it raced through his whole body. Hale had no clue how they'd break past that monster's brutal, hard scale, but Chamber had cooked up a plan, and then he grabbed my attention and told me to come with him. He ordered Ale to back them up from a safe distance, while he and the others bolted straight at the black wyvern. This was their last shot. If they messed it up, there'd be no coming back. As he rocketed out of the way and dodged hit after hit from it. The monster hunkered down, powered up a blazing fire breath, and lunged straight at him. But Ale cut it off instantly and hurled a light javelin straight into its face. The poison had started to slam into him, spinning his head with dizzy waves, and he knew he had to race before it stole the last of his time. But he couldn't pull it off by himself, and he turned to May and begged her to launch him. Using her cushion like fur, she flicked him hard, so he bounced off and rocketed into the air. He finally spotted the exact spot he'd been hunting for. A nasty wound marred its head, so even with its whole body turned solid, he knew that spot was the crack in its armor. And right then, he ripped the full power trapped inside his sword wide open, and drove the blade straight into its head. The black wyvern got absolutely annihilated, burned to a crisp with nothing left but smoke. And somehow he pulled it off and slammed it for good. But it was already over for Chamber. The poison had burrowed into his whole body. Right then their phones lit up with the wildest news. Every one of them just leveled up, and in an instant, all three were fully restored. Ale shot him a worried look and called out, asking if he was okay. Then he sprang back up like it was nothing, flashing a thumbs up like, "Poison-S gone." They both cheered at the news, and when they saw how much loot they'd scored, he immediately pushed to sell every last piece. Because black wyverns were super rare, Ale cut in, saying there was no way they could carry it all, and he nodded right along. So he turned back toward town, praying the monsters had finally thinned out. But then, out of nowhere, he sensed that mysterious cloaked man closing in, and it sent chills ripping straight down his spine. He tried to crack what was causing that sickeningly ominous vibe, and he couldn't shake the thought that it was probably the evil god's blessing crawling back into the picture. No time to process it, he barked for everyone to stay sharp, and just like that, before he could even catch his breath, the man grabbed him out of the chase with his bare hand. Disappointment crushed the man, because that's all it took to end him, while Ale froze in terror as Chambers, blood sprayed across the room.